The views and opinions expressed by tonight's guest and topic of discussion do not necessarily represent the official policy or position of Spaced Out Radio, Spaced Out Saturdays or Sundays, SOR Media, its hosts, syndicated carriers, or anyone associated with this broadcast. Any rebroadcast, reproduction, or other use of this broadcast or podcast without the express written consent of SOR Media is strictly prohibited. Listener discretion is advised. Are you experienced? Then come own the night with us.
Little brother has taken control, shoveling dirt in every hole. Predators to condemn your soul, watching you and watching me. We're all
Station atop the mountains of British Columbia, live from SOR headquarters. This is Spaced Out Radio with host Dave Scott.
We live behind glass curtains and act like nothing's wrong. Soon you will belong.
You can follow us on our website, spacedoutradio.com, and on Spaced Out Radio on iTunes. You can follow Dave on Twitter at Spaced Out Radio, and on Instagram at Dave Scott SOR, on Facebook at Spaced Out Radio Show, and on our YouTube channel, Spaced Out Radio.
Brother wants to make headlines, be immortalized. Everyone's got an electric eye with the digital spies. They've watched you for so long. I know you're out there somewhere watching me.
Buckle up, space travelers. It's time to go for a ride on Spaced Out Radio with host Dave Scott.
I know you're out there somewhere. We've watched you for so long. Wait for you to fall. We'll expose you all. I know you're out there somewhere watching me. Little brother wants to make headlines, be immortalized. Everyone's got an electric eye with the digital spies.
It's Monday, January 22nd, Tuesday, January 23rd, if you're on the East Coast or across the pond, and this is Spaced Out Radio. Hope you had a great day and night. I am your host, Dave Scott, live from the Great White North in the Cariboo region, on top of the mountains of central British Columbia, right here at SOR headquarters. We are 150,000 strong, nightly on WQEE 99 Rock the Key down in Noonan, Georgia. We're also live on the United Public Radio Network 107.7 FM in New Orleans and over 160 countries around the world. We're also live at spacedoutradio.com, Spreaker, The Fringe FM, Renegade Talk Radio, the High Plains Talk Radio Network. And if you're listening in on Revolution Radio, remember the Double R Machine is a donation station financed by you, the valued listener. Head on over to freedomslips.com and donate today. You can find us all over social media. We are broadcasting live on Periscope TV right now. We're on Twitter at Spaced Out Radio. Give our Facebook page a like, Spaced Out Radio Show. On Instagram, you can follow me at Dave Scott SOR. Subscribe to our YouTube channel. Go to youtube.com/Spaced Out Radio. Listen to us on iHeartRadio in the United States. TalkStream Live. Tune us in on TuneIn. Download and subscribe to our shows on iTunes. And of course, our website is spacedoutradio.com. Now, we also have a GoFundMe page going right now. GoFundMe.com/We Own the Night. That's GoFundMe.com/We Own the Night as we try to create a brand new studio here to head into terrestrial radio. GoFundMe.com/We we own the night. If you head to our website, spacedoutradio.com, you can go to our Spaced Out Radio store, pick up a t-shirt like the one I am wearing right now. If you're on Periscope, you get to see it. Read the Encounter online, where we got some pretty strange, paranormal, and odd stories for you to catch up on. My latest blog there is as well. This week it's on Disclosure once again. We also got great videos from UFO seekers Tim Doyle and Leslie Mitchell Clark's Contact TV. Tonight on the show, we have author, researcher, and writer Mitch Horowitz joining us as we delve into what people think is the dark side, but most people, or most feel, the most misunderstood of religions. Paganism, Wicca. Are they really the root to all evil? Or are they a land-loving spiritual voice of Mother Earth? For centuries, witches and warlocks were burned at the stakes for their evil and heinous practices. But for many, it's a practice of peace, nature, healing, and respect. Why the difference? Well, we're going to find out. Mitch also has a great book out called Occult America, dealing with topics like Ouija boards and seances in the White House. We'll learn more tonight as he'll be with us for the next 2 hours. In hour number 3, pagan and Forest Moon paranormal creator Eric Cooper will join us for the final hour. Mitch, welcome to Spaced Out Radio tonight for your first time. Thank you so much for coming on the show. How are you?
I'm great. Thank you, my man. Glad to be here.
It's really glad. This is one of these topics, Mitch, that, you know, a lot of people either steer away from it or they tackle it head on. What made you decide that this was a topic that you wanted to do a little bit more research in?
Well, growing up as a kid in Queens, New York in the 1970s, we were surrounded by the occult. You know, I would race home from school to watch reruns of The Twilight Zone on television or check out Merv Griffin or Mike Douglas, two popular talk show hosts here in the U.S., interviewing astrologers and gurus and psychics and UFO witnesses and so on. And my sister would gather with friends in her room to play the Ouija board during sleepovers. The occult was in the air, and I wanted to know more about it. I knew that there was something that just went beyond the shrink-wrapped Parker Brothers box that the Ouija board came in. I knew these things all had a history, and I was fortunate enough as I reached adulthood to become a publisher and writer in the field of the occult and metaphysics myself. I've been researching this stuff and exploring it personally ever since I've been a kid.
Was this something that you found was just like one of those callings that when you decided that what you wanted to do with your life, that this was something that you needed to investigate a little bit more because you now had the ability and learning, the know-how to research?
Yeah, I think that's true. I think it really was a calling. You know, when I was a kid, for example, like many kids, like many adults, I looked at newspaper astrology just for fun, just for a little kick. But I started to ask myself, well, wait a minute. Whether you believe in this stuff, whether you don't believe in it, we do know it's an ancient philosophy. We do know this has roots back in ancient Babylon, ancient Egypt, ancient Greece. It didn't just fall from the sky yesterday. And I wanted to peel the onion back and ask, how did this stuff reach our contemporary lives? How is it that today everyone you meet knows his or her sun sign, whatever their religious background? You ask them, you a Sagittarius, an Aquarius, a Pisces? They know. They can tell you. And they know something about that. Again, this didn't just fall from the sky. This is prime evil wisdom, if I can put it that way, that came down to us in the 21st century. Again, you can believe it or disbelieve it, but it's a surviving core sample of ideas that are really millennia old. And I wanted to know more about that. Our world is a world full of mysteries. We take these little things for granted, but they have an extraordinary history.
A lot of people would say, you know, like I know if I brought a Ouija board around my mother, you know, she would probably have a heart attack right there and absolutely pass out. Did you get any type of fallback from your family and friends when you said that this was a topic that you wanted to take on head on?
You know, fortunately, my family and friends have been really quite supportive, and we have quite a diverse family. My in-laws are Mormon and Catholic, and they have been quite supportive of what I do. I think they understand that when you're on a spiritual search, that spiritual search has to be played out without boundaries, without parameters, or it's not a real search. Now, there are a lot of people who have evil associations with the Ouija board, and I understand that. And when you're dabbling with something like Ouija, which is a strange doorway, whatever it's leading to, whether it's some aspect of your subconscious or whether it's some unseen world that has forces that can be felt through the Ouija board, or if you just think it's a way that we scare ourselves, whatever you're dealing with, it's a doorway to something unknown, either psychological or metaphysical. And people are frightened of it, and I understand that. And there was a time where I would have cautioned people against using Ouija boards, but the truth is some wonderful things have come through Ouija boards. The third most popular religion in the nation of Vietnam is called Taoism. Taoism, roughly speaking, it means religion of the high palace. That religion was essentially channeled through a Ouija board in the early 20th century. And it might interest people to know that the Cao Dai religion, which is the third largest faith in Vietnam, had maintained its own private militia and sided with the U.S. and Canada and France during the Vietnam War until 1975. It's a little-known fact. But, if you were to say that a Ouija board is evil and you shouldn't experiment with it, that religious movement would never have been born because Ouija was its instrumentality. There are poets who have channeled magnificent works through the Ouija board, including Jane Roberts, the Pulitzer Prize-winning poem, The Changing Light at Sandover by James Merrill, was channeled through a Ouija board. We can't put up walls. We have to experiment, and experimentation can be scary, but asking what's around that hill is also what makes us human.
Why do you think people have such a fear of it today? I mean, when I look at the religious old school of when they were burning witches at the stake, for literally centuries, I look at it today and I think, we have probably matured a lot more in the last 100 years than the previous 1,000. And when I sit here and I think about, everything that has gone on, this was a group of people that were highly persecuted for having a different kind of beliefs compared to the king or queen.
Yeah, there's always some sort of mass psychology in human nature that seeks to define a community based on who it excludes. And we see this playing out all the time in large and small ways, including ways that are sometimes catastrophic. Throughout human history, people define themselves and feel a sense of parameter and a sense of safety by creating an exclusivity around a certain community. So religious outliers get blamed. People who have identities, languages, customs, habits that differ from the norm get blamed. And there's a certain thrill that the majority side takes in this. We like having enemies. We like having things to get worked up about. It's also a way of finding simple solutions in a complex world. If you look at the events in Salem, Massachusetts, say, in America's colonial days and in the U.S. colonial days, you have a situation where people were in New England where there were crop failures. It was a very tough winter. There was friction and violence with local Native American tribes. And rather than dealing with the complexities of all these things, you could blame the devil. You could blame these possessed young girls in the village of Salem. And that became a simple answer in a complex world. So we comfort ourselves by having straw men who we can blame for things. And various times through history, those straw men have been witches.
Do you think it's a fair or unfair persecution that they've gone through, and somewhat even today, Mitch, where we still see people absolutely hammered for their own personal beliefs? Now, I think society is opening up a little bit more, especially as the younger generations move away from the church and move closer towards finding their own spirituality, whether that's back in the church of a different religion or a different faith, or going more the spiritual route of nature and Wicca and paganism. It seems like, the newer generation doesn't want the BS that goes along with a lot of religious belief where I have to harm you or I have to segregate you or ostracize you if you don't believe what I believe.
Yeah, really, it's pretty remarkable. In our generation, we are seeing a growth and a kind of solidity of institutions around Wicca, paganism, the a rebirth, really, of the nature-based, of the seasonally based religions. We're seeing this in Australia, in Europe, in Canada, in the U.S. This renewal of nature-based religious practices, which is sometimes called Wiccan, which is sometimes called Druidic, which is sometimes called Neo-Pagan, it's here to stay. These are healthy, growing religious movements. They have been growing since the 1950s. And more, they are movements that get recognized, for example, within the militaries of various nations. Here in the United States, for example, you can have a pentagram used as an official religious symbol, either on your tombstone or for ceremonies, if you are a military service member or a veteran. That's something new. That's only been the case since the year 2007. There are so many different religions, including occult and metaphysical faiths like Wicca, represented in the U.S. military, that the U.S. Veterans Administration at this point probably has something like 70 different officially recognized military symbols, of which the pentagram is one. These movements are here to stay. They are a basic part of Western life and life in other parts of the world. There has been a rebirth of Wicca going on since the early 1950s, and it's a successful rebirth. It's part of the religious scene. It's a permanent part of the landscape.
Do you think that people are starting to realize that there really is nothing to be fearful about? Is that what it is? Is it that simple?
It's a tricky question. You know, something that I've written about in the New York Times and elsewhere is that there is an uptick of violence going on around the world against people who are accused of witchcraft. This is happening sometimes in West and Central Africa. This is happening sometimes in Latin America, sometimes in India, sometimes in Indonesia, sometimes in Papua New Guinea and other nations of the Pacific. And there are occasions where this violence will actually travel to the West along with migration cycles. We're a mobile world. People move around. And if you've got West African or Indian immigrants who move to London, for example, and there might be local conflicts with people who are accused of practicing black magic, those conflicts travel. We are a mobile world, and we're going to remain a mobile world. So what's happening in one part of the world is not so distant and so far away. And there has been an uptick of violence against people accused of witchcraft. And I've tried to analyze the reasons why, and I've tried to call attention to that because it seems like a very strange time for that to be happening. Most people associate the witch craze and witch trials, as you were alluding, with events in Europe going back hundreds of years. But this is still going on, and people get into local conflicts, sometimes in developing nations and sometimes in industrial nations, and they will occasionally accuse someone of casting a spell against them or being involved in some sort of black magic. I got interested in this situation because of the murder here in New York City in the borough of Queens, where a man accused his girlfriend and her mother of casting spells on him and murdered them. Now, he was in all likelihood psychotic, but I started to notice that language popping up in the news from different parts of the world. So violence against witches is still a very, very real thing. And if you want to read my research and my writing about that, you can just throw my name into Google with witchcraft and New York Times, and you'll find one of my articles.
When you have so many different people starting to believe so many different things out there, I mean, you know, it's very, very intriguing with the definitions that people have now of religion. We still have the staunch, you know, hardcore Christians out there, Catholics, Hindus, Muslims, that, you know, their religion is best. The world should all be, you know, preaching what they are preaching and teaching. And yet we have this whole newfound people who are literally hanging out, trying to figure out their own path. Do you think the realm of paganism or Wicca or spirituality in general is more about, you know, is more the social acceptance today? Because we see a lot of people, you know, now starting to bash Christianity over the last number of years. And I'm going to pick Christianity because North America is more of a Christianity type of continent. Okay, so if we could just focus on that for a minute, I see a lot of people now, instead of just, saying, Christianity isn't for me, they've become very malevolent towards it, and they've become, more loving towards their own spirituality and what they believe or not, whether it's becoming more agnostic or becoming, preaching to a higher source instead of using the word God because God is taboo. You see where I'm going with this?
I do. It's an interesting question. First of all, one will find again and again in polls of religious practice in North America that one of the fastest growing categories that people choose to identify with, if not the fastest growing category, is non-affiliated. People saying they're spiritual but not religious. That's a very fast growing category, probably the fastest growing category among all the different religious affiliations that people claim when a pollster contacts them. We as human beings tend to be very, very good, as I was alluding earlier, at selecting enemies. That's one thing that we always seem to excel at. We may not be able to do anything about any number of worldwide crises, but we're very good at saying who we dislike this particular week. So I'm turned off when I hear people single out and criticize a certain religious faith or movement. People will criticize Catholicism, for example. And obviously there are things in Catholicism and in every religion that warrant criticism. These are man-made institutions and they're flawed institutions. But the fact is there's such a rich tapestry of life and so many different searches and different individual stories going on within Catholicism. And in my opinion, so much that's mystical and beautiful and meaningful. I'm never going to classify myself as a critic or as an opponent of any one religious system or another, because it's so easy to generalize. And when we generalize, all we're really doing is creating a kind of us versus them mentality, which is the typical human story. And I'm tired of it in the 21st century. And I'm tired of it in the year 2018. It's too simple to say, the problem are evangelicals, or the problem are Muslims, or the problem are all these crazy New Agers running around that Horowitz is always defending. The problem is this proclivity that we have as human beings to want to tell other people what to do. To me, the individual search for meaning is itself sacred, and we're very fortunate to live in societies where the individual search for meaning is protected. To me, that's the primary task of religious people in the public realm, to ensure that my neighbor's right to search is as protected as I want my own to be.
See, I just make it easy, Mitch. I've decided that if it's not the fault of the vegans or the Dutch, I really don't know. That's where I've become prejudiced. You know what I'm saying? I've chosen my prejudice here. It's vegans or Dutch, one of the two.
Or the Dutch. It's that simple. It's one of them. And that's been the human story, So, and it's funny, of course, people love going online and hating on other groups or have conspiracy theories and so on. But the last place that they'll actually look is in the mirror. I'm always asking people, as I should be asking myself, do people in your life find you great to be around? Do you keep your word? Did you help your friend Mike move the other day? Would your spouse say you're always there to lend a hand? It's doubtful that many of us would get very high grades in those areas. But it's very easy for us to go online and complain about this or that group without looking in the mirror and say, on an intimate level, in terms of what I deal with hour by hour, how do people experience me?
Well, I know that I have been, recently pushed to the limits with a gentleman I used to work for in regards to his Christian faith. And a lot of people have had these same experiences, maybe not to the extent where, I worked at a place where, my belief system even though I was a believer in God and a believer in Jesus, because I do consider myself a spiritual creationist. I mean, that's the hybrid that I've created for myself. And because it did not fall into his realm of belief, when I went on stress leave from my job, he basically said, when we decide to bring you back, he goes, I'd like to see some changes in you, including giving up your radio show and giving up your ghost hunt that you do at the local museum, and you might want to start attending my church. Well, I've talked personally, and my audience doesn't even know this. This is the first time I'm bringing this up, and I've literally had to seek a lawyer because you can't cost me my job for something along those lines. You know what I'm saying?
Right.
I mean,
it's a total perversion of faith as well.
Exactly.
How can you coerce someone into a worshipful mindset? Religion has to be exquisitely voluntary, or it's a perversion. There's just a sliding scale of extremism from him telling you to do that to someone in another society putting a gun to someone's head and demanding a forced conversion. It's really just a sliding continuum. It's a perversion of everything faith is supposed to be.
Yes, actually, I'm meeting with a lawyer on Wednesday about that, to be honest.
Yeah, well, good for you, because the truth is, as stressful as that is, and as difficult as that is, it creates something better for all of us, because what you're doing, you're standing up to this person and you're asserting your legal rights. That very individual act that you're undertaking helps protect other people's search for meaning, because human beings are remarkably consistent. And if this employer has done this to you, chances are he's done it to somebody else. Somebody else will try to do this.
He totally has.
Yeah.
Actually, to be absolutely blunt, one of my best friends where I live, he used to work for the guy, and the guy did the same thing to him.
That's too much.
So
what you're doing, you're helping everybody in your society, because you're standing up to somebody who's trying to strip other people of their basic inalienable right to search for meaning on their own. So bravo.
Oh,
bravo.
The funny part about it is, his church is literally I live in the middle of a very, very secluded area, and I have this green belt, and right across the green belt from me is his church. And I drove by it today, and I was just actually laughing about it, because their big sign says, "We're non-denominational, everybody welcome." Well, I didn't get a welcome.
Or else.
Everybody welcome, or you lose your job. But, this isn't but on the flip side, this isn't a bashing of Christianity. Okay, I mean, everybody is allowed their faith, and there are going to be people, it doesn't matter which religion it is, whether it's pagans, whether it's Christians or Catholics, who are going to take it that extra mile. Do you think society still accepts people who take, their interpretation, whether it's of the Bible or the Quran or any religious text, to that extreme anymore? Is society done with that in your research?
Well, I wish I could say society is done with it, but we seem to go in these kind of messy cycles where we take several steps forward and then we slide backwards. And religious coercion is going to be a part of human life as long as there are humans, in a sense, not because there's something that's intrinsically coercive about religion, or that any one particular faith has sharper elbows than the other. But we as human beings have a perpetual innate habit of wanting to tell other people what to do. And sometimes that gets expressed through religion. And I really think that the religious search comes to a screeching halt when certainty sets in. When certainty sets in, analyzing and questioning become impossible. I don't see faith as certainty. I see faith rather as persistence. I see faith as something that drives you forward when circumstances around you might be discouraging. Faith to me is an act of moral persistence, not an act of certainty. In fact, I would even say where there's certainty, there can't be real faith, because that certainty almost elevates the individual in his or her own mind as this great arbiter of judgment and someone who has perspective on all these cosmic matters and therefore can judge coworkers or employees or other people. I would almost say that certainty is an absence of faith, which is why people cling to it so, because they want to tell themselves that they believe in something. It makes them feel secure. It makes them feel morally superior, but they're not searching and they're not faithful and they're not persistent. If anything, it's a kind of vanity. And I'm afraid that's just a basic part of human nature. I don't think we've ever lived through a period where we haven't had that, which is actually why, going back to your story, we need laws that protect people from religious coercion, because human nature is not really going to change. So we need laws that protect the search for meaning, which is why your struggle is actually going to help a lot of people.
Well, you know what? It's not just that, and I want to take it off of me because this isn't supposed to be about my situation. I just brought it up as an example. But there's a lot of people out there, Mitch, who do not understand the Wiccan faith or the paganism. Would you like to break that down? Because, like, I know, for instance, I'm gonna point out Shar here for a second. She is a longtime listener, been listening to us for literally since I think show number 2 that we did, and we're now 3.5 years in.
Wow.
And, you know,
this is 99, isn't it?
You know,
we are some years in, yeah.
And so she is very highly Catholic, practices Catholicism all the time. Beautiful lady, you know, but here is someone who doesn't understand. She asked a question earlier, and I'm not going to say it's an ignorant question, but it's a question about, you know, a lack of knowledge, not on her part, but just she's never really investigated it. You know, she said, you know, isn't paganism linked to Satanism? You know, and this is an attitude that a lot of people take when it comes to, you know, paganism or the occult or anything along those lines.
Yeah. You know, paganism is really just a term, a general term for all the various faiths that existed in the pre-Christian world. Some of them were polytheistic, some of them were nature-based. And what we're witnessing in our time is people who feel that some of these nature-based religions that really disappeared to a very great extent, both with the rise of Christianity and then with the onset of the Dark Ages, represent for people today a way to explore spirituality that's in sync with the seasons, in sync with nature, that has a kind of an ecological politics at its back that's very female, positive. Really, the pagan faiths that exist today are, in many respects, a human attempt at recreating some of the nature-based religions that were so intrinsically bound to the ancient world. People who practice the mystery religions and the nature-based religions never had any conception of themselves as worshiping Satan or consorting with demons. That was a completely alien concept that was hurled against them as an accusation as the pagan powers and the rising church were vying for control over the hearts and minds of people in the ancient world. The church prevailed, and in human warfare, whether it's physical or a war of ideas, the winner always gets to classify the loser however he wants. And the early church fathers classified the ancient pagan powers as demon worshippers or worshippers of Satan. And for that matter, if the pagan powers had prevailed against the church, they would have persecuted and classified the church that way. Because when people are in a war of ideas, just as in matters of politics, they characterize the other side in ways that the other side does not see itself. So as in antiquity, as today, people who are engaged in Wicca or paganism, by and large, have no interest whatsoever in questions of demon worship or Satanism or anything of that sort. For the most part, those were charges that just got hurled against people in antiquity. There are also people who are very ethical and very self-directed who are, in fact, interested in modern conceptions of Satanism. And they don't hide it. They're very forthright about it. You can go on Twitter and find the Church of Satan. They have a very clear theology that they are very capable of defending. They're very forthright. They're very sincere. They're very straightforward. They're not for everybody. But, that slice of religious experimentation is out there in the world as well. It doesn't hide. It announces itself. You can consort with whomever you want, visit whatever neighborhoods you want. But it's not like one faith is cloaking itself or cloaking its beliefs. People tend to be fairly straightforward about what their belief systems are. You just have to approach them and listen to them. They'll tell you what they believe.
Do you think a lot of the misconception about occultists, pagans, Wiccans, still stems from, the biblical writing where basically, in certain sections it says, don't deal with witches, don't deal with psychics, it's taboo to do so, and it's not of God to do so. And the argument that goes along with that is, who is speaking? Is this actually God's word or the man who wrote it?
That's beautifully put. There's a few issues there that are really interesting. Some of our negative associations with Wicca and witchcraft and paganism really do stem from the frictions of late antiquity, where there was a struggle between the old powers and the new powers for religious dominance in various different societies. And you have those passages of Scripture that you just cited, and you've raised the key point. Is that God speaking, or is that an individual writer speaking? Now, the fact is, there are some portions of Scripture that are absolutely transcendent. They speak universally to everyone across geography and time. I'm thinking of the Beatitudes, for example, the Sermon on the Mount. There are other portions of Scripture, if one accepts that Scripture was written by a wide variety of different writers, which historically speaking is absolutely the empirical fact of the matter. If one accepts that Scripture was written by a wide variety of writers, there were people who had local interests, who had political interests. There were different tribal groups and sects that were vying for power and influence over one another, or they wanted to erect a kind of wall, so to speak, so that a member of one sect wouldn't consort with a member of another sect. So sometimes they would identify certain practices, whether it would be homosexuality or whether it would be divination or whether it would be astrology, and use that as a dividing line to say, that's how they behave over there on that side of the fence. This is how we behave differently over here on this side of the fence. And history can be messy. Christ's birth was heralded by a star in the east, which was followed by the wise men. And yet this is the same book of Scripture that will tell us you're not to pay attention to the stars for messages and omens. Sometimes these things were actually local theological struggles that were playing out. I don't necessarily think these were universal transcendent truths, such as the ethics of Christ or the law-giving of Moses. I think these were passages that probably more reflected the local character of the writers of the Bible who were struggling to define their groups as opposed to other groups. It was a hard time to survive. It was a hard time to be alive. These theological and political struggles were very decisive. They could mark the difference between life and death, between the survival or fall of a given kingdom or village or human society. And defining yourself and your parameters by your beliefs was a very, very strong local imperative. I think some of that appears in Scripture, and I think that's where these passages that place prohibitions against astrology and things such as that appear. I don't think they're part of the transcendent message of Scripture.
Is it then the way people today, or even say over the last couple of 100 years in North America, have broke it down for themselves through religious leaders or reading the Bible themselves? Because let's face it, I may read something that you have a different translation to, Mitch, and vice versa.
That's right. And those differences are always going to be very sharply felt. I have no doubt there are people listening right now that are saying, this guy is making an absolute mess of Scripture. What he's saying is completely wrong, completely heretical, and theologically, they're very entitled to those views. But civically, I'm entitled to mine. And that's why we have to have societies that protect the individual search for meaning, because differing interpretations are not criminal acts. They are acts of spiritual search, of ethical search. And if you're going to have a society that's cohesive and successful, sooner or later, you're just going to have to say, my neighbor is entitled to his point of view. That's the dividing line between societies that succeed and fail.
Do you find then, Mitch, when it comes to people who are, considered or public about a Christian faith, do you find there's a lot of people actually delving into paganism and witchcraft behind the scenes to maybe try and contact the dead or to learn more about it because they're afraid to go public about their interest in the field in just wanting to learn more knowledge about it?
Well, I definitely find there are people who identify as Christians, and this has been true for a long time, who hand in hand with that might also go to see a psychic or go to see a channeler, or for that matter, engage in positive mind metaphysics, engage in what is sometimes called new thought, which is the belief that thoughts are causative. You call it the secret or the law of attraction or the power of positive thinking. There are lots of people who intermingle Christian mystical and metaphysical ideas. It's very common to find people, for example, who identify as Christians who might, on the side, sometimes have an interest in astrology or have an interest in some sort of divinatory art. They don't necessarily think of themselves as being New Age or occult or mystical. It's just an interest. It's just an interest. I have an in-law who's a devout Catholic, and she went on a Franciscan retreat one weekend, and the brothers at the retreat house were teaching people about a system called the Enneagram. And in this system, which some of your listeners may have heard of, one of its uses is to use a 9-pointed star to identify 9 different personality types. Now, that is a system and a method of spiritual psychology that would not be recognized within the church. And sometimes people get in trouble from time to time within the church for dabbling in such things. I would argue that it's a very helpful form of self-exploration. Now, she, as a devout Catholic, didn't have any problem with this. She found it fascinating. I find it fascinating. So people have a remarkable ability to combine their traditional faith with certain non-traditional practices. I think it's one of the wonderful aspects of our religious culture today.
Is there any way the faith movement in general can come together as one, so pagans and Christians could be friends, or Seventh-day Adventists going along with Muslims? I think I realize that's very utopic in saying that, but is there any headways to try and bring these societies together for the betterment of man, rather than understanding that the majority of every war out there since the beginning of time, one way or another, has been religious-based?
Well, I think that one way we can certainly come together, one way that principled people of every religious persuasion can come together, is through defending the rights of the members of the other religions. I would defend someone's right to religious practice even if they wouldn't defend my own. I would stand up for their right to search spiritually, religiously, ethically, according to their own inner lights. So I'm not concerned as to whether Muslims and Seventh-day Adventists will ever agree. I'm concerned that there be enough principled people on either side to stick up for the religious rights of the other community. That's one concrete way that religions can get together.
Well, let's focus in, because we only got about 15 minutes here before we got to go to our first break, or 13 minutes before we got to go to our first break. Define for a lot of people what paganism and witchcraft is, and Wicca is, because I don't think a lot of people fully understand or comprehend, the idea behind it. I think they think it's all about standing in front of a with a pestle and mortar and grinding away spells with rat's tails and the Eye of Newt or something like that.
Right. It's Wicca and paganism in the 21st century, going back to the mid-20th century, is really It's the rebirth of the ancient nature-based religions, of the pre-Judeo-Christian nature-based religions. And in my view, it's actually a heroic effort on the part of modern people to try to piece back together the threads of religious practice that were so powerful and so deeply interwoven into the ancient world, and that have come down to us today only in fragments. So you'll have people who are recreating Druidic practice or recreating Wiccan or pagan practice. It is a revival, a reconstruction, a rebirth of religious practices from the ancient world, very often based seasonally, based in nature rituals, very often possessed of a strong ecological ethic. Wicca has been a vehicle for female religious leadership that's extremely important to many people. So this has been a reconstruction of religious ideas from the pre-Judeo-Christian world. Again, these are very often nature-based, seasonally based religious practices that seek to sync up human life with the cycles of the seasons, of the tides, of the planets once again. It's very meaningful to a lot of people. That's, in a nutshell, what Wicca and neo-paganism is today.
I think where a lot of people have an issue with it today is, it seems like we have a lot of people trying to blow up a lot of Christian holidays, whether it's Christmas, whether it's Easter, or other celebrated times where, they say, well, this was started on a pagan front, or this was started on a Wiccan front, and I think people are like, really, are we trying to one up here? Is it really worth it? Is it really necessary? And I can see where society gets a little frustrated with things like that, and I can see where it's the sake of starting an argument for no reason. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah, I agree. I mean, listen, I'm very happy to celebrate and wish people well in their sacred observances. And the fact is, human history is messy. It doesn't travel in straight lines. Religions always borrow from one another. Yes, there are Christian holidays that coincide with or that replace ancient pagan holidays. The festival of Halloween, really, the church renamed it All Souls Day, All Saints Day, All Hallows Eve. It was an attempt on the part of the church in late antiquity going into the Middle Ages to co-opt what was basically an ancestor worshiping holiday that existed throughout different parts of Western Europe. It was Celtic in origin. And religions have been borrowing from one another literally since the dawn of time. You are going to find aspects of Greek and Babylonian and Egyptian observances in Judaism, in various reaches of Christianity. People compare the Madonna and Child found within the church tradition to Horus and Osiris or rather Horus and Isis in Egyptian tradition. And there's truth to all these things insofar as human beings don't travel in straight lines. We zigzag. Our traditions overlap. Human history is messy. Religions have always borrowed from one another. But is it necessary to call out my neighbor's faith and say, you're being derivative of this? I'm probably being derivative of all kinds of things that I haven't come to realize or come to understand. More important is to learn your history, understand the cycles of human history and how they all kind of blend into one another, and let your neighbor have his sacred observance. There's no religion on earth, going back to earliest recorded history, that hasn't borrowed from its neighbors. It's a simple fact of human life.
But the same thing could be said the other way around, too, is we see a lot of Christian people now, going after Halloween, where they call it the fall celebration, or something along those lines. I know there's a big party at the church right across from me where, they have big signs all around, come for the fireworks and the games on this fall celebration night. I mean, do we really have to get petty with it is what I'm saying. Whether it's, trying to take over Christmas with a different religion or trying to make fun of Halloween, even though you're not promoting it as Halloween, but it's Halloween. I mean, people aren't that stupid. You know what I'm saying? There has to be some sort of
it's always
reality
be Halloween.
Here. Exactly.
Right. And not only will it always be Halloween, but here in the U.S., there are people in the military who celebrate Halloween as a veritable religious holiday, who do belong to Wiccan or neo-pagan movements, and to them, Halloween is not just a time to play trick or treat and put on masks, but they are restoring Halloween to its roots as a holiday of ancestor worship and welcoming the spirits of ancient ancestors to warm themselves by the fire, so to speak, and marking the transition from summer into fall, marking the seasonal changes. There are many people for whom Halloween is a veritable religious holiday today, and there's no degree of name changing that's going to ever alter that. Halloween is here to stay. It's as basic a part of the human landscape as a continent. We just need to, I think, quite frankly, leave one another alone. We need to do a better job of leaving one another alone. It's not necessary to challenge somebody's sacred holiday, whether it's Christmas or whether it's Halloween. We as a human species can do a much better job at holding ourselves together and creating cohesive societies if we can just be more indifferent, I think, to one another's religious beliefs. We don't need to challenge them. We just need to know that we will defend them and hope that people who belong to other religions will do the same for us.
So when it comes to paganism, is it something that people should be fearful of? Because like I said, there's people listening to this show right now that I know personally that are very, very timid or not understanding about the pagan religion.
Well, I have parents who write to me sometimes and say, my kid is drawing pentagrams on his notebook, and I've done some books on paganism or witchcraft in his or her room, and my response is almost always, you should be delighted that your teen son or daughter is interested in something more than video games or just hanging around on the phone all day. Kids who are engaged in these inquiries into paganism, Wicca, witchcraft, they're the searchers among us. And that's very often true of adults as well. When you have an adult who doesn't just go with whatever the easiest, most slippery path is, but who has a streak of nonconformity, these are the inventors. These are the questioners. These are the diggers. These are people we need. I think it's wonderful that every town should have people who are a little bit out of step. Where would we be without the people who are out of step? So rather than worrying about them or being scared of them, be glad they're there, because new ideas come from the margins. And I think people who don't fit in are very often the best among us.
We only have about 2.5 minutes here before we got to step out for our first break tonight. And I told you that this show is going to absolutely fly by, Mitch. And so far, it is happening that way.
On a broomstick, yeah.
Yeah, exactly. And that brings up that brings up an actually good point. People have to get rid of the stigmas of it, that all witches aren't turning green and flying my ex-wife's car into the moonlight.
I think that people would be surprised to know that those among us who identify as witches, they're librarians, they're English teachers, they're accountants, they're repairing your computer. Some of them are serving in the military. Again, they're some of the best educated, most personally seeking, and I think most principled people among us. And the reason I say that is because you really value your religious freedom. You really value the principles of a democratic society when you actually exercise those rights, when you go with the flow when you go down the easy path, you never really have to question or assert whether your rights are protected. But when you're out of step, you do have to be cognizant of your rights and other people's rights, and you have to work to defend them. So civically, I would say the people who are out of step religiously are probably the best among us.
So you're not watching people run naked through the stars at, on All Hallows Eve or something along those lines?
Oh, well, listen, some of that does go on. There are covens where nudity and spellcasting is a basic part of their religious practice, but they're consenting adults, and they're practicing free assembly, and my wishes are with them. My wishes are with them. I want them to find meaning.
Sully Erna, the lead singer of Godsmack, is Wiccan, and he actually practices that. That's where I got that from.
Oh, yeah. Yeah. That's
but if it's not hurting anybody, like, who cares? Who cares?
Yeah, that is it. That is what it's about. It's consensual. Isn't it what freedom is for? What else are we here for? We're not here to just be consumers. We're also here to be seekers. And if we're not actively seeking, and if we're not doing things that bother other people from time to time, are we using our rights? What are these rights for?
We only got about 15 seconds here before we go to break, so there's really no point in getting another question in at this moment. But we are speaking with Mitch Horowitz tonight on Spaced Out Radio. His website, mitchhorowitz.com. That's Horowitz with a Z on the end. I'm going to give you the American pronunciation, Horowitz with a Z on the end. All right, we're talking about one of his books, Occult America. We're going to get into some real cool things here. Ouija circles, Masons, White House seances. We only got Mitch for one more hour, and then in hour number 3, our resident Wiccan and favorite paranormal dude, Eric Cooper, is going to join us from Forest Moon Paranormal and S4. We got lots going on here. You're listening to Spaced Out Radio. I am your host, Dave Scott. We'll be back right after this.
Hey, space travelers, it's Joe Roop, your host of Spaced Out Saturdays. Come join me as we explore the realms of the paranormal, the esoteric, and everything in between every Saturday night at 9 p.m. Pacific, midnight Eastern. You know the truth is out there. Don't get caught sleepwalking. Come join Spaced Out Saturdays. That's every Saturday night, 9 p.m. Pacific, midnight Eastern, right here on SpacedOutRadio.com.
Psychic Sundays, spiritual communication, ET contact, Sasquatch in your backyard. We will have it all on Cosmic Passport with me, Elizabeth Anglin. Each Sunday, starting at 9 p.m. Pacific, midnight Eastern, at SpacedOutRadio.com, I will take you on a journey of enlightenment. The goal is learning from the soul on out. We'd love it if you joined our experience. Cosmic Passport, heard Sundays at SpacedOutRadio.com.
365 days a year, we're in the field, investigating UFO sightings, talking to alien abductees, and visiting secret military locations like Area 51. We're UFO Seekers, official partner of Spaced Out Radio. Follow our daily search for the truth at ufoseekers.com or like us on social media. Catch us on Spaced Out Radio every third Monday of the month as we discuss Area 51, UFOs, and more. And also, don't forget to subscribe to us on YouTube.
From coast to coast to coast, Blacklight Uncharted is taking on the paranormal across Canada. From ghostly hauntings to the UFOs flying above in conjunction with MUFON Canada, we're closely investigating what's going on in the northern skies and checking out the apparitions that walk among us. Check out our videos right here at SpacedOutRadio.com. We want to know your thoughts, we want to hear your experiences, and we want you to share your stories. The answers are out there, and we intend to find them.
Would you like to become one of our space travelers? All you have to do is click on the Space Travelers icon at SpacedOutRadio.com. For only $5 a month, you can get access to some great prizes, as well as private monthly shows, newsletters, and a members-only section on our website. Become a space traveler today.
It's paranormal news at its finest. Welcome to The Encounter. at spacedoutradio.com. The Encounter online is SOR's trusted news source for everything weird and strange going on around the world. This is news editor Eric Markham. Our team of journalists are scouring the planet for those strange stories that rarely make the mainstream. No fear-mongering or fake news here. Head over to spacedoutradio.com and encounter the Encounter.
Want to learn more about aliens, cover-ups, conspiracies, cryptids, and the paranormal? All you have to do is tune in S4 as we take over the Spaced Out Radio night, starting at midnight Pacific, 3 a.m. Eastern, each and every Saturday night, right after Spaced Out Saturdays. Hi there, this is Eric Cooper from Forest Moon Paranormal. Join me, Corey Ruiz, and friends as we discuss the hot topics of the night. It's fun, entertaining, and as dark as the night. Find us at spacedoutradio.com.
Hey, this is Canadian Paranormal Investigator Mike Moore. The third Wednesday of every month, I'll be teaming up with Dave Scott to bring you Ghosts of the Great White North. Each month, we will bring on guests from across Canada to discuss their ghostly encounters. Canada is a paranormal hotbed with stories you've never heard, so we're going to bring them to you. So get comfy on your Chesterfield, grab a donut, and join us, eh?
Are you an experiencer? Have you had run-ins with strange creatures you can't explain? ETs, Dogman, Bigfoot, werewolves? They're enough to scare the daylights out of anyone. Hi there, I'm Butch Witkowski from your 4-Cop. And on the last Monday of every month, you can listen to me and the host, Dave Scott, talk about the weird and the strange being reported on Spaced Out Radio. I'm going to bring my investigations and sources, you bring your experiences, and we'll figure out the rest together. Strange Days on Spaced Out Radio. Come tune us in at spacedoutradio.com.
There's a lot of strange going on in this world, and we can help you find out what's going on with you. Paranormal, cryptids, UFOs in the sky, aliens in your bedroom tickling your toes. We have the investigators you need to find out the answers you deserve. All you have to do is head to spacedoutradio.com. Your information is 100% confidential. The SOR Sightlines Report. It's free, and we're here to help.
Are you interested in advertising on Spaced Out Radio? Head to our website at spacedoutradio.com and click on our Advertising tab. There, you will find an assortment of ways you can get your product out there with us, from radio commercials to banners and social media. Have a product you like our hosts to endorse? We can do that too. Visit spacedoutradio.com for more details.
Don't have time to listen to Spaced Out Radio live? Wherever you are, the car, the office, the shower, or even if you're traveling, we're right here for you. Each Spaced Out Radio show can be found on iTunes, TuneIn, and on our YouTube channel, Spaced Out Radio Show. It's the perfect way for you to catch up on our shows. For more information, just head over to our website, spacedoutradio.com, and tune in to us today.
Do you want to know what's really going on in your world? Do you have questions about who you can trust in the mainstream media? Then look no further than the Rebel Planet. Come get the straight answers right here at spacedoutradio.com. Join me, Jamie Sexton, creator of Rebel Planet News, as I fill you in on the stories behind the stories. All you truth seekers, be sure to tune in to Rebel Planet on spacedoutradio.com the third Thursday of every month.
The views and opinions expressed by tonight's guest and topic of discussion do not necessarily represent the official policy or position of Spaced Out Radio, Spaced Out Weekend, Spaced Out Radio Limited, its hosts, syndicated carriers, or anyone associated with this broadcast. Would you like to connect with us? Head to spacedoutradio.com for all your latest show info. And hit us up on Twitter using the hashtag SpacedOutRadio. Now, back to Dave Scott and SOR.
Welcome back to the second hour of Spaced Out Radio tonight. I am your host, Dave Scott. Great to have you with us. Tomorrow night on the program, William Van Huss is going to join us. We are going to talk about the legend of the Mad Gasser of Montoon. It's going to be an interesting show. I'm going to be honest, I don't know much about the Mad Gasser. I can only imagine. We get going at 9 p.m. Pacific, midnight Eastern Time at spacedoutradio.com. We want to welcome in everyone listening in on WQEE 99 Rock the Key down in Noonan, Georgia, home of The Walking Dead. We are live as well on the United Public Radio Network, 107.7 FM in New Orleans and over 160 countries around the world. We are also live on the Fringe FM, Renegade Talk Radio out of Las Vegas. And if you're listening in on Revolution Radio, remember the Double R Machine is a donation station financed by you, the valued listener. Head on over to freedomslips.com and donate today. Bill Cardwell has set the password for tonight in the SOR Space Travelers Club. What the hell is this, Bill? Seriously. I don't even know. Sciagonology? Is that it? Bill sets a password each and every night right here on the mighty SOR. Now, if you want to follow us on social media, we are live on periscope.tv. We are also on Twitter at Spaced Out Radio. Use the hashtag Spaced Out Radio if you want to connect live with me during the show as well. Give our Facebook pages a like. Spaced Out Radio Show on Instagram. Follow me at Dave Scott, SOR. You can go over to our YouTube channel. Go to youtube.com/Spaced Out Radio for our archives. And we are on iHeartRadio in the United States. TalkStream Live. Tune us in on TuneIn. Download and subscribe to our shows from iTunes. Our website, once again, is spacedoutradio.com, where we have a plethora of features for you, including joining the SOR Space Travelers Club for $5 a month. Rock out to some Bumblefoot. Shop at our Spaced Out Radio store. You can also read up on the Encounter online. My new blog is on there today. And, of course, we have the Encounter online you can read up on, and videos from UFO seekers and Contact TV, and so much more at spacedoutradio.com. Tonight we have author and lecturer Mitch Horowitz with us. His website, mitchhorowitz.com, if you want to check it out. We're talking everything occult, Wiccan, pagan, and everything that is weird in between. Mitch, welcome back.
Thank you. Good to be here.
Good to have you with us as well. I want to kind of shift gears here a little bit and get more into a lot of the occult practices. The biggest one that people know of and people preach against, whether they're religious or not, is the Ouija board. It has so many legends that follow it. You have done a lot of research on the Ouija board. What led you down that path?
Well, I always had a kind of attraction to it as a kid. And I was always curious as to how something that came in a shrink-wrapped game box with a barcode slapped on it could have any occult properties. And yet there are people I know who don't really share any of my interest in mysticism and the occult, who have told me stories of using the Ouija board and getting very wrapped up in some dialogue with some entity that seemed to be moving the little pointer that traveled around the board. And again, whether this is just some kind of subconscious autokinetic movement or whether there's something we don't understand going on, it's a doorway to a dark place. I don't necessarily mean a sinister place, but it's a doorway to a place that we don't really understand. The Ouija board has been around, really probably the first newspaper articles about what was then called the talking board or the witching board started to appear in the late 1880s. It wasn't until the early 1890s that a group of novelty manufacturers in the city of Baltimore patented the Ouija board, and that's how that particular name and that brand of board came down to us. And it's the one object from 19th century spiritualism. By spiritualism, I mean the culture of seances and table rapping and mediumship that has stayed with us today. And people have a lot of freaky experiences with it. I've had freaky experiences with it. I've sometimes been experimenting with the Ouija board, and in one instance I got an email from somebody out of the blue, total stranger, not somebody I knew, who said, I get the idea you've been practicing with the Ouija board and I want to warn you off of it. I've heard all kinds of very creepy, strange stories around the Ouija board. There was one reviewer who received something called an angel board that he was asked to review for a spiritual or New Age magazine. And he began to get threatening phone calls at work, and the police put a tap on his phone, and they found that the phone calls were coming from his own house that, as he told it, his son had been messing around with the Ouija board, and he thought that the boy had been possessed by some kind of an entity or something, and he was making these threatening phone calls to his own father. Where does this stuff come from? Again, are we just kind of acting out some of the dark corners of our own psyche, or is there some unseen power or some not understood principle that's coming through the board? It's very hard to know, but this object has lingered for a long, long time, and there are a lot of creepy stories around it.
What's the weirdest thing that happened to you that you can't explain?
Oh, boy, that is interesting. I have had people reach out to me and contact me just at very prescient moments, as if they were able to read my thoughts, like somebody warning me against using the Ouija board. I have encountered instances. I can think of one instance where I was asking a medium for some advice on a difficult matter, and I watched as his face very distinctly took on the features of the person I was asking him about. It was almost like watching a master actor, in a way, take on the physical features of another being, like a Winston Churchill or Abraham Lincoln. So I wouldn't say that the actual physical makeup of his face changed, but he took on an expression and a look and a physical comportment that absolutely resembled the person that I was asking him about, who he didn't know and would have had no way of knowing. And that was mysterious. That's something that happened fairly recently, actually.
We were playing with a spirit board one time a number of years ago. Oh, this is going back 4 or maybe 5 years ago now. And I've told this story a couple of times on this show, but not very often. We were sitting around playing the Ouija board, and so there were 4 adults around the kitchen table, and about 6 feet away from the kitchen table was the wood stove. And the wood stove had been out since 9:30 that morning. The next thing you know, we turn our heads, and the owner of the house, he says, "Who lit the fire in the stove?" And we started asking all the kids, like, this thing is 6 feet away from us, okay? Like, there is no way, it's not like going into another room and lighting this and then somebody walking back there to say, who lit the stove? No, this stove is right in front of us. So the owner of the house started asking around, who lit the stove? Who lit the stove? And all of a sudden the planchette, my fingers and my friend's wife her fingers were on the planchette, and it starts going around and starting moving in circles. So she asks, "Do you know who lit the stove?" It goes to yes. And she goes, "Well, who lit the stove?" And he spelled out, "I did." And we asked why, and he goes, the spirit goes, "I was cold." I was cold. Yeah. That's probably the strangest story. That's probably the strangest happenstance I had with a Ouija board or a spirit board. I mean, to me, they're the same. It's just a different title.
A couple of years ago, I was doing a live cast Ouija board seance online with the editors of a website called Elite Daily, and it was located in the West 20s here in the borough of Manhattan in New York City. And something was moving the planchette, the little plank that moves around the Ouija board, and we had gotten conversing with whatever it was that was moving the little pointer, and we were told that it was a writer, a woman who lived in the area who had committed suicide. And one of the editors later did some research and found that the address that the pointer spelled out was an address where, in fact, a female journalist lived on that block who had committed suicide in the 1940s. So it was rather strange. There were 5 of us, I think, sitting around the table. Nobody had any knowledge of those events, and that's what was produced. It leaves you with a pause as to whether we really understand everything that's going on out there.
Do you believe
everybody seems to have a Ouija board story too?
Is that true? Do you believe that it is an actual spirit moving the planchette, or it is the energy of the person going through their fingers to make that move subconsciously?
Well, it's funny. People who have researched this, and I don't think there's been any particularly extensive research that's gone on over Ouija boards in terms of extended clinical lab work, but there has been some. And people who have experimented with it invariably say that it's just some sort of autokinetic suggestive phenomena that grows out of the subconscious mind. And to be perfectly frank, having used the Ouija board a number of times, I've never experienced remotely anything like an unconscious physical state where I'm moving the pointer in some way that is manifest from my subconscious, and I am projecting it outward so as to imagine that there's some third party or other entity outside myself that's moving it. I've never experienced anything remotely sub or unconscious like that, nor has anyone that I've ever worked with on the Ouija board. It's almost as fantastical an explanation as the supernatural one. So I think we simply don't know what's going on. I couldn't nail down one answer or another. I refuse to rule out anything. I think that we have various layers to our existence. One aspect of our existence, I think, is non-physical in nature. I couldn't put a definite label on that. I couldn't give you a perfectly classified or cataloged explanation of what I think goes on in the non or extra physical aspects of our lives. I think we get glimpses of it, for example, in moments of deep intuition, in moments of devout prayer, at periods of transcendent meditation. There certainly have been very legitimate ESP experiments in very closely, carefully controlled clinical laboratory conditions that are not well understood, but that have been responsibly conducted, that indicate some sort of anomalous transfer of information in lab settings. Our lives are not just flesh and blood. Our lives just are not just simple local gray matter in our brains firing off electrical impulses. There is, I believe, some non-physical aspect to our existence, and therein begins the mystery. That's where the question begins, not where it ends. And that somehow may be manifesting through what people experience at certain moments in using the Ouija board. Other times, people suspect that somebody's moving the pointer, and they may be very correct. But I don't think those explanations cover all the bases. There are some real mysteries out there.
People like Robert Murch or Karen Dahlman, who are, I would consider them professionals of the Ouija board. Karen has actually the last two years done a Halloween night special Ouija board live reading on the show where we've had nothing negative come along with this, yet the board is considered so evil. In your opinion, is it all Hollywood and myth, or is it people being silly, maybe over a few beers, especially teenagers, when they, loot dad's cologne cabinet for the bottle of Aqua Velva, and conjuring up, Beelzebub or some sort of devil's spawn that makes this type of reaction happen?
Well, there are so many frightening stories about the Ouija board, and yet, while I think one has to approach it with caution, I would never tell anybody stay away from it, because I'm not going to curb another person's experiments. As I was talking about in the first hour, there have been beautiful works of art. There have been religious movements that have come through the communications received through a Ouija board. So I'm not going to tell somebody to close the door of inquiry, to close the door of experimentation. At the same time, Ouija does seem to open a doorway that we don't fully understand, and one has to approach it with care. There are, of course, many aspects of human life of which that could be said, physical and metaphysical. Every time you get behind the wheel of a car, you face ethical decisions. People face very serious and considerable safety decisions all day long. That doesn't end in one area or another. It travels throughout life. And I would say when you're breaking out the Ouija board, because we don't understand it, approach it carefully. Don't be using alcohol when you're approaching it. Don't treat it like a light game. If you have impressionable kids in the house, Maybe you don't want a Ouija board in your house. I have 2 Ouija boards here in our home. I don't encourage my kids to use them. If they feel like using them when they get older, they are welcome to. But it's not something that I would just leave hanging around and treat lightly, because there's an aspect of the unknown to it. You don't pet a dog you don't know. You don't just strike up, or you shouldn't, an intimate conversation with somebody on social media you don't know. Ouija is a lot like that. You're kind of putting a line out there. You're sticking your hand out into the unknown, and you don't know what's out there to receive it. So it should be approached with maturity and some degree of caution.
I got a couple questions coming from our audience for you, if you don't mind, because usually in hour number 2,
Sure
we like
thing.
to get our audience involved. And first question comes from Marie on Periscope, who is asking who your mentors were in learning all of this information and going down this path of study.
Oh, wow, that's a wonderful question. I've never really given a lot of thought to who my mentors are, in the sense that I've always been an independent researcher and experimenter. There certainly have been people I've encountered along the way, probably not all of whom would want their names mentioned, who have helped give me guidance or been teachers or source of support to me. In terms of authors that I've been influenced by, Neville Goddard is a mystical thinker who has been a huge influence on me. The historian Francis Yates, who wrote a lot about occult history in Europe during the Renaissance, has been just a huge influence on me. Some of the writers I admire today are Richard Smoley, Gary Lackman. They're 2 historians of the occult whose work I've always admired. In many ways, I've gone my own way independently, and sometimes I've met people temporarily at different periods of my life who have provided a certain degree of help to me. People don't always want to be identified with occult topics. I know religious scholars whose names are reasonably well known, at least within the field, who are interested in channeling or different aspects of the supernatural, who in certain cases have asked me not to use their names because they think it's going to hurt their reputation. I have a different estimate of things, but I have to respect their request for privacy.
Next question coming from Joe, who is asking, what is your opinion, Mitch, on ritual magic? The Golden Dawn refer to it as high magic. Do you know what that means?
Yeah, the Golden Dawn would use the term high magic as a way of distinguishing what they were doing from stage magic or just kind of petty superstition or carrying around good luck charms. The Golden Dawn was an occult organization that grew out of a really vast, beautiful occult revival in Europe in the mid to late 19th century. And they were making a very earnest effort to try to revive some of the practices that belong to the mystery religions and the initiatory religions of the ancient world, primarily Egypt, Greece, Rome. And so they practiced what is sometimes called ceremonial magic. The same was true of the British occultist Aleister Crowley, who was briefly a member of the Golden Dawn. Later, he branched out in his own directions. And essentially, you are trying to revive and piece together fragments that we possess of ancient and sometimes medieval and Renaissance-based initiatory esoteric practices and do spell work. You're trying to use non-physical forces to conform reality to your will, to bring about circumstances through the means of spell work and a ritual use of spirits and invisible forces and different aspects of nature, sometimes appeals to archangels, guardian angels, ancient deities, or aspects of the world that are non-physical in nature, forces that are sometimes associated with the elements, the seasons, different areas that are considered to be a vortex of certain kinds of energies that the ceremonial magician can channel through rites and rituals and thereby use non-physical means to help bring about and accomplish a desired end in the world. I have a great deal of respect for ritual magic. It requires a great deal of dedication, tremendous amount of education, a strong ethical sense. Personally speaking, my path is not really the path of the ritual magician. Ceremonial magic is something I respect. It's not my path. My path is more anarchistic. I guess I'm interested in all kinds of different traditions, and I believe that we as human beings probably have ways of relating to unseen aspects of life that I would say probably come in a more natural, transcendent, meditative, instinctual, intuitive state. And I don't really get a sense of involvement or empowerment from reviewing and memorizing spells and diagrams and tables that you might find in a spell book or a grimoire that comes out of an organization like the Golden Dawn. I very much honor and respect what they do, but I take kind of a more anarchistic approach to magic, if I can put it that way.
Where do you think automatic writing and psychic ability or intuition come into play with the occult? Because this is another big issue that it can be so subjective, people mixing up their personal opinion compared to what is actual intuition. How do you trust what you are getting through automatic writing or psychic ability?
That is a fantastic question, and it's a very pertinent question, because I have found that there are people out there who I think are ethical channelers and psychics who do have some sort of intuitive gift, and I have watched some of these people make pronouncements with a tremendous degree of insight and intimacy and intuition. I have watched some of the very same people who I know to be ethical practitioners get things absolutely dead wrong. Magic likes to hide. Psychical powers cannot be summoned on demand. Things that are associated with the psychical or the extra physical cannot just be made to order and drummed up whenever you want. They kind of weave a pattern in and out of our lives, even the lives of somebody who really has maybe some sort of a natural proclivity or gift in that area, a pattern that is unpredictable, a pattern that is messy, a pattern that can't just be summoned up with the snap of a hand. So when people, if an individual chooses, and I say this very seriously, if an individual chooses to try to avail himself or herself of advice from a channeler or a psychic, I cannot say this strongly enough. Verify that advice. Verify that information that you receive. If you went to a doctor and that doctor gave you a diagnosis that you had questions about, you would get a second opinion. When you go shopping for a car or even for a household appliance, you are very often looking at and comparing different things and gathering together lots of information. Why would you have any less of a standard when you are asking intimate questions of a psychic or a channeler, even someone who you trust, even someone who you have received reliable advice from in the past? The quality of the advice you're getting is almost certainly going to vary, just as the quality of advice you might be getting from a medical professional would vary, or from a trusted friend would vary. You need to sync it up with other advice and other sources of information. Pool your intellectual resources and then act. Don't act based on one piece of advice, because I have seen psychics, and again, people who I know to be ethical practitioners, arrive at extraordinarily powerful and accurate insights, and I have seen other cases where the very same practitioners are completely backwards and wrong about certain things. We are not perfect receptors in any way. Even those of us who have some sort of a intuitive gift are not perfect receptors. So you have to take that advice and see if it syncs up with your own sense of ethics, with things that you're hearing or learning from other sources. Use it as one source of advice, but not as an exclusive source of advice.
You mentioned the word ethics, and that topic has actually come up a lot on this show, especially in regards to the realm of the paranormal, where we see the big debate, science versus spiritualism, and whether or not psychics should be on paranormal investigation, so on and so forth. Do you believe that that true psychic intuition is harmful to investigation of the paranormal?
Well, it's interesting. For a long time here in the U.S., the CIA did in fact have a psychic spying program. This is a fact. It was funded under a federal budget line, and it was later cut under Bill Clinton. Russia, to my knowledge, based on information that military researchers have told me, continues its own psychic spying program. And what they will do in Russia, and what was done here in the United States, was they would take the information that was received, and as I was alluding earlier, they would pool it with other information. They would treat it just as one source. So if, for example, you bring a psychic into a criminal investigation, and there are such cases on the books, once in a while, somebody will get some sort of an authentic, intuitive hit. But obviously, you're not going to change the whole tenor of an investigation based upon it, but it might be a lead. It might lead you to something else. You have to treat this material in balance with other sources of material. So yes, I think you can use psychics or remote viewers. You can use non-traditional intuitive means of information seeking to supplement something that might be going on in some kind of an investigation, but it's just going to be one tool among several in the belt of the investigator.
And I think the fact that the media also jumps on these stories where we see these fake psychics duping people for tens of thousands of dollars at points, where they lump everybody into the same category, that it's all fake, and that's the opinion that the public really gets off of that. So there are a lot of psychics, though, on the flip side, who believe that everybody, one way or another, is intuitive. How do you draw that line between what the mainstream media is kind of telling the public, comparatively what psychics are saying that everybody has this ability if you just choose to follow it?
Yeah, well, it's an interesting question. One of my heroes was the ESP researcher J.B. Rhine, who did lots of ESP trials at Duke University beginning in the 1930s. And Rhine believed that there wasn't really any way for the individual to strengthen or supplement his or her psychical abilities or ESP-related abilities. He believed that it was a kind of naturally heightened gift, so to speak, that a person was either born with or not. Now, on the flip side, you have the American psychic Edgar Cayce, who was a popular medical clairvoyant in the first half of the 20th century and a very beautiful, thoughtful man in a lot of ways. And Cayce believed, in fact, that intuitive gifts could be exercised, could be built, could be improved, worked out like a muscle, and toned and improved upon. So you do have these two opposing views that are out there. I tend to believe that everybody has some ounce of intuition, but that there are, in fact, a very small number of people who seem to have some sort of an extra aptitude in that area. And people are very right to be concerned about frauds and fakery. That's always been with us. One surefire way of identifying a fraud or a fake is a psychic who's charging ruinous sums of money. Sometimes psychics who are charging huge sums of money are usually engaged in some kind of a con operation, but your psychic who charges maybe no more than a local therapist or psychologist, and if you're seeing the person only once, it's not a ruinous sum of money, and you probably don't face any great risk, again, as long as you don't get carried away and as long as that person is not hooking you with these kind of open-ended answers that keep you paying again and coming back again and again, if someone is encouraging you to make repeat visits, each visit being charged by the hour, that's probably a situation that you want to be careful about.
I got a couple questions from Andrew on Twitter. He is asking, Mitch, Arthur C. Clarke, the great sci-fi writer, stated that any sufficiently advanced technology is indistinguishable from magic. Do you think that esoteric knowledge and ritual magic may be at its core an ancient and forgotten science, a physics that is maybe unknown?
It's entirely possible. I mean, we're seeing things come out of quantum theory nowadays that would have been regarded as magical thought 100 years ago. The notion that other dimensions may exist, the notion that there are cosmic wormholes through which we can cut across the space-time continuum, the notion that subatomic particles seem to occupy multiple places at once, an infinite number of places, until someone takes a measurement. These are accepted facts in the hard sciences today, and yet 100 years ago they would have seemed to come out of an H.G. Wells novel. So the more detail that we get about things, that we learn about life and nature and the physical world, the more fantastic everything becomes. It doesn't become less complex, it becomes more complex. So it's entirely possible that things that we refer to as magic, extending back to antiquity, are actually primeval man's own sensibility of the complexities of the subatomic and interdimensional worlds that we are only now beginning to just get a fragment of understanding of through quantum mechanics over the past 80, 90 years or so. So the Arthur C. Clarke quote is a very prescient quote, and it's entirely possible that ancient man, who led a very complex life, who had a very deep understanding of nature, much more so in some regards than we do today, had glimmers of some of what we've been able to codify today in certain reaches of the physical sciences.
Follow-up from Andrew. He says, there seems to be an increased frequency of people these days who believe that they have received a special message from a higher power, like aliens, for instance, and they feel impelled to tell everyone about it. Why is there an apparent uptick in messianic messengers now?
Yeah, that's an interesting question. I mean, it's really the question of why and how certain things go viral. You know, the first flying saucer sighting in America, as we know it today, occurred in 1947, and suddenly in the 1950s, everybody was talking about flying saucers appearing over Washington and Los Angeles. There are different possibilities. One is actually that these things were physical occurrences and there was a real authentic uptick, and the eyewitness accounts were just a reflection of empirical reality. Another possibility is that there's a power of mass suggestion, and once one human being has an experience and it seems mysterious or alluring or empowering, as messianic messages sometimes do, other human beings will decide that they want to feel a sense of centrality and importance, sometimes subconsciously, and suddenly they'll come up with the idea that they're receiving these messages. It's difficult to say. I wouldn't lurch too quickly toward the psychological explanation. I wouldn't overlook the fact that there could be something going on that we're seeing a record of testimony coalesce around, and we should pay attention to it. I would take care that when people feel they're receiving some sort of higher message, sometimes there is a certain degree of self-importance involved, and I would want to ask myself whether the person felt elevated as a messenger and that was what was going on in his or her psyche, and whether the message was an ethical message, whether the message was violent and harmful, or whether it comported with some universal sense of ethics, such as not obstructing or doing harm to or blocking someone else's human potential. Does the message they're receiving come in the form of a kind of us versus them mentality, a good guy versus bad guy mentality, in which somebody else is made into the source of all the problems, or the straw man, or the scapegoat who's going to get blamed for things. I think we have to be very careful when people are claiming the mantle of some sort of higher message. But sometimes people do receive messages from sources unknown, and sometimes what they receive can be very beautiful. I mentioned in the first hour the poet James Merrill, a Pulitzer Prize-winning poet who channeled his most beautiful poem collected in a book called The Changing Light at Sandover over a Ouija board. And it's a magnificent work of art. He felt he was receiving some sort of extra physical message. I don't know whether he was or not, but people get messages from places that are off the grid sometimes, that are outside of our commonly understood ways that information gets transferred. And when they're communicating something that is beautiful and compelling, in those cases, pay attention to them.
Do you find that with people who are intuitive, or those who say they have the ability to do so, that they fully comprehend what the ability is for, or that they just translate the information as they see it and it's up to you to figure it out? Because there seems to be in the field of intuitives this big cross-section of what is a message that should go forward and what's a message that maybe shouldn't.
Yeah, it's an interesting question. Almost every channeler I've ever met has described him or herself to me as just a kind of passive radio transmitter. They say that they are just downloading this information, and it's just an impersonal function that passes through them. My experience of what they're doing has been a little different. Usually I find that the language that the channeler uses, the ethics that the channeler demonstrates, is a product of the individual, him or herself, for better or for worse. Even if one were to leap to the conclusion that there are authentic channelers and psychics out there, and I believe there are, I would see those people as instruments, and what comes through them, they're not really radio receivers. They're more like instruments, and what comes through them is going to be colored and influenced in tone, content, style, language by the makeup of the individual himself. The personality of the channeler comes through in some of these messages. So it's also important that one have a sense of who the channeler is, because some of what's coming through, I think, is influenced in tone and content by the nature of the individual. Edgar Casey, the medical clairvoyant who I mentioned earlier, was somebody who grew up in the rural South in the United States, came very much from a Bible reading, Bible Belt community, read scripture through each year of his adult life from cover to cover. The language that he used in his channeled readings was very much the language of the King James Bible. If you look at A Course in Miracles, which is a channeled work that came through a Columbia University research psychologist named Helen Schuckman in the 1970s, it has a very different kind of tone. It does have a contemporary psychological tone, at least dating to the language that was commonly used within research circles in the 1970s. The message may have come through Schuckman as a kind of transmitter. She certainly felt that way. But it seemed to have been colored by her intellectual sensibility. So, when you know something about the channeler, it'll give you some greater idea about the nature of the message, because I think there's always something of the psychic or the channeler in the message.
Have you ever channeled before?
No, it's not something I do. It's something that I've participated in as a querent, but I am not in any way a psychic or a channeler.
Oh, man. Try it sometime. It's fun. Try it sometime. Yeah. My whole introduction to this field was, and I didn't even know what the word channeling was on December 13th, 2011, around 10 o'clock that night, where I channeled the angel of death, who I'd seen earlier in my mother's eyes.
No kidding.
Yeah, it was. That was my opening. My opening to this entire
episode.
realm. Oh yeah.
Is that right?
Yeah. Yeah, that's what kicked everything off for me, and that's the moment my happily boring life ended.
Wow, interesting.
Yeah,
that's a chilling episode.
Yeah, for sure. Hey, we only got about 60 or 13 minutes here with you, and I'm absolutely fascinated about your book, Occult America, to learn about White House seances, because the White House is like this big mystic building of paranormal activity where everybody from, certain presidents who've done channeling to the Bush daughters saying that they saw ghosts appear in the White House on numerous occasions.
That's right.
How did you go about finding out information about the White House?
It's extraordinary, the information that's on public record and has just been neglected. For example, it's often rumored that Abraham Lincoln held seances in the White House. Well, he did permit a reporter from the newspaper, the Boston Gazette, to be present for one of these seances, and the story appeared not only in the Gazette, got picked up by other newspapers around the country. This was during the Civil War. A couple of newspapers in the Confederacy even ran the story. There's no record of the White House ever contradicting it or objecting to it. So you do have a public record of Lincoln and his wife, Mary Todd, holding a seance in the White House where they permitted a reporter to be present. Richard Nixon consulted with the psychic Jean Dixon in the Oval Office. We know this, again, as a matter of public record because back in the day, Nixon was recording everything that went on in the Oval Office. This became the Watergate tapes. So he recorded his meeting with Jean Dixon, which was more comedic than anything else. But you have lots of instances where there are very strange things going on in the White House that you can track down and back up with actual factual historicism. I found, for example, in some of Ronald Reagan's speeches and writings, there were ideas and actual phraseology that he had borrowed from a book called The Secret Destiny of America that was written by an occult scholar named Manly P. Hall, who lived and worked in Los Angeles, which was Reagan's hometown, throughout much of the 20th century. Now, this book, The Secret Destiny of America, was at one time a really occult underground book, and I found unmistakable phrasings and terminology and ideas that demonstrate that Reagan was borrowing passages of Manly Hall's work in some of his earliest political writings going back to the 1950s up through the first term of his presidency. I wrote about this in the Washington Post. So these aren't just speculative matters. This is the real deal. I can produce basic empirical historical evidence that demonstrates some of the unusual beliefs of the inhabitants of the White House. You're not kidding when you're saying it's like a mystical house. There's been strange goings on there, but I would say that what goes on at the upper echelons of society is really just a mirror of what goes on in the rest of society. There were many adults interested in spiritualism in Abraham Lincoln's day. So the commander-in-chief, tried his hand at it. It was Richard Nixon's secretary who urged him to speak to this psychic and brought her into the Oval Office. Well, there were lots of people in the early 70s and today who were interested in psychics and channeling. So sometimes these things find their way into the White House and other corridors of powers just as they exist in the culture at large. There's not this big dividing line between that part of the culture and the more ordinary workaday part of life. Beliefs that exist in one realm find their way into another, and it's historically possible to document these things.
What kind of stories did you hear coming out of the White House that were intriguing about these seances? You mentioned Abraham Lincoln, and one of our listeners, Marie, mentioned that Nancy Reagan also had a spiritual advisor as well. Are the stories far and few between to actually prove that this were acts going on in the White House, or is there enough information to decipher what they were talking about and what they were searching for? Because, I mean, as much as I would love to see it happen, I think it would be great to see, the White House allow some paranormal team, come in there and do an investigation.
Yeah, I don't think that'll happen in our day, but it's interesting. There have been a lot of different presidential administrations that have sort of intersected with matters of the occult, or where there's been some story here and there. Nancy Reagan's spiritual advisor, as your caller was very rightly saying, was an astrologer named Joan Quigley. She died just a few years ago. She lived in San Francisco. And Nancy and Ronald Reagan always had an interest in astrology and tarot cards and the psychical. I was telling the story of Reagan borrowing phrases from this occult book by Manly P. Hall, The Secret Destiny of America. After the assassination attempt was made on Ronald Reagan, Nancy became hypersensitive about possible threats to his life and about his scheduling and syncing up his scheduling with propitious signs from the stars. And she was in frequent contact with Joan Quigley. This wasn't just an occasional thing, but the presidential schedule would be changed from time to time based on advice that was given by this astrologer. During Bill Clinton's first term, Hillary Clinton was accused of holding seances in the White House. This was reported in the Washington Post by Bob Woodward, the famous reporter. The truth is, Hillary was not really holding seances in the White House, but she was holding sessions with a New Age teacher named Jean Houston, who is a friend of mine going back a few years, and they would hold creativity exercises where Jean would encourage Hillary as First Lady to hold imaginary conversations with her historical hero, Eleanor Roosevelt, one of the great First Ladies in 20th century American history, and to have conversations with Eleanor Roosevelt about her vision as First Lady, what she wanted to accomplish politically and ethically. And this whole thing got sort of translated and skewed in the press as Hillary holding seances in the White House, which wasn't really what was going on. Though Jean Houston did tell me a funny story where there was just one time where Bill Clinton sat in on one of their sessions, and she told Clinton that he was an undeveloped shaman or magician. And he kind of rolled his eyes and got up and walked out of the room. So that was Bill Clinton's one encounter with the occult, and he left the room.
Well, it doesn't surprise me with the Clintons, considering, they have had a very strong understanding and personal interest in UFOs, aliens, Roswell, and all sorts of, extraterrestrial communication. I mean, everybody knows the John Podesta tie-in to Bill Clinton, Obama, and Hillary, and his affection for UFOs as well. Do you see, as you look down the path with aliens and UFOs becoming more prominent in the media these days, that could be considered part of the occult and the attraction to, the paranormal? Because a lot of people, such as myself, also believe there is a major tie, even though very few are investigating it, between consciousness, UFOs, ghosts, and cryptids.
Yeah, I think you're probably right. We're going through an interesting time right now in terms of UFOs, because I think that we are starting to see an authentic mainstream opening of this conversation. Just a few weeks ago, the New York Times ran a very earnest and very sober piece of reportage about UFO research that has gone on in the U.S. Air Force, and about people in the Air Force who continue to be advocates for this research. And it was the first time I can recall seeing an article about UFOs in the Times that was written from a really earnest, straightforward perspective that wasn't sardonic or sarcastic or kind of winking at the camera, so to speak. You mentioned Leon Podesta, who was an official in the Clinton White House, who has very forthrightly expressed an interest in UFOs and a belief in the legitimacy of that question. So I think we are just beginning to see a mainstream opening of that conversation. And I'm watching that very carefully, and I'm very interested to see where that goes, because I think that we need to mainstream this question. The UFO question is no longer something that's just the property of a certain subculture or small group of researchers. There's been enough testimony going back just to the immediate post-World War II era, and enough questions, and some unexplained blips on radar and photographs, some empirical concrete things that warrant exploration. And I think it's inevitable that this question is going to go mainstream. Its time has come. I think we're probably witnessing that in our own generation.
We only have about 2 minutes left with you tonight, Mitch. I would like to ask you one more question in regards to that. Are you happy that, or are you satisfied with the way the media is starting to take the subject of UFOs seriously?
Oh, yeah. I think it's overdue. I also think it's very, very important that mainstream intellects, mainstream academics, mainstream reporters get involved in this question. It's been a subculture pursuit long enough. We need to bring more daylight and a broadened chorus of voices to the UFO question. We need to do so seriously. We need to do so with integrity. Shortly before he died, the legendary newsman Peter Jennings had a 1-hour special on UFOs. This was several years ago, and it was a wonderful, wonderful primetime TV special because it applied what I think of as the highest journalistic ethics and sobriety to the UFO question. And I think it deepened the question for a lot of people. And we need to be able to speak about this topic the same way we speak about any other research topic, and to apply the same standards. We need to be rigorous, we need to be sober, and we need to bring daylight to it. And I think that's happening in our own time. It's actually an exciting time for UFO research.
My friend, before we let you go, please tell our audience where they can find more information about you and pick up your books.
Sure thing. If you go to mitchhorowitz.com, that's my website. There are lots of links there to books, articles, lectures. I have a whole bunch of lectures that just recently went up on YouTube. If you throw my name into YouTube, there's a lot of interesting material there too. You can find my email on my website. If you want to write to me with a question, you're very welcome to.
Thanks so much, my friend. What a blast this has been.
Thank you.
I would love to do it again. I told you it was going to be probably one of the fastest 2-hour interviews you ever did. I don't think we disappointed.
Right on. That was terrific. Thanks. I enjoyed it.
Absolutely. Mitch Horowitz, once again, his website, mitchhorowitz.com. Coming up in hour number 3 on Spaced Out Radio from Forest Moon Paranormal, Eric Cooper. He's pagan. We're going to learn a little bit about paganism right after this, and we're going to open up the phone lines too. So if you want to call in and ask Eric a question about what it's like to be pagan, what it's like to grow a high-quality beard like he has, we'd love to have your opinion on it as well. And we got the Thought of the Dave coming up later on in the show. You're listening to Spaced Out Radio. I am your host, Dave Scott. We'll be back right after this.
Looking for a place to advertise at a very reasonable cost? Look no further than Spaced Out Radio. SpacedOutRadio.com has an advertising tab that you can click to check out our daily, weekly, and monthly packages to play on the radio, or our website including social media. From commercial spots to banners, we have it all. Check out our competitive pricing today.
There's stories, then there's the truth. Do any of us really trust the news anymore? This is Jamie Sexton, owner of Rebel Planet News. The third Thursday of every month, I appear on SpacedOutRadio.com to bring you the truth you deserve, without mainstream media lies or alternative media fear-mongering. We'll get to the heart of the story and deliver the truth you're seeking. So come join us here for the Rebel Planet at SpacedOutRadio.com.
To the dawn,
We're lighting the void on Saturday nights on Spaced Out Radio. Hey, this is Joe Roop, and I'm hanging out in SOR headquarters every Saturday night, bringing you the latest news when it comes to the weird and strange. Bigfoot, occult, UFOs, ghosts, and everything in between, I got you covered. You can tune in to spacedoutradio.com starting at 9 p.m. Pacific, midnight Eastern Time. Come travel into the void with us on Spaced Out Saturdays.
Not ready for bed on Saturday night? Right after Spaced Out Saturdays, hop on over to S4 with Corey Ruiz and me, Eric Cooper from Forest Moon Paranormal. With S4, there are no limits to what we try and uncover. From government conspiracies to helping clean up the paranormal, no topic is safe on S4. We get to the heart of the matter, of the subjects you want to learn more about. So tune in on S4 starting at midnight Pacific, 3 a.m. Eastern, only on spacedoutradio.com.
Visit purpleplates.com today. For over 40 years, the Purple Energy Plates have been delivering amazing results for their many customers. Inspired by the great genius Nikola Tesla, the harmony, healing, and energetic effects of the plates have proven over and over to be beneficial and often miraculous to thousands of customers. Check their site for daily specials and choose from their many energy products. You won't be sorry. Visit them today at purpleplates.com.
Hi there, I'm Butch Witkowski, lead investigator with U4Cop. On the final Monday of every month, you can listen to me and host Dave Scott on Spaced Out Radio's Strange Days. We're going to get to the heart of the matter when it comes to what's happening out there. People are seeing and experiencing things from ET contact to Bigfoot, and I want to hear about it. Your experiences are what we investigators need to help solve these unknown mysteries, so tune in at spacedoutradio.com to the final Monday of every month from Butch Witkowski's Strange Days.
This is Eric Markham, news editor for the Spaced Out Radio's The Encounter Online. We have put together a great team of writers and journalists from all over the world to bring you top-quality paranormal stories, from alien encounters to the latest conspiracies. You won't find any of that fake news here. True stories and top-notch reporting as we look to bring these experiences to the mainstream. The Encounter Online, only at spacedoutradio.com.
Do you want to know the truth? Do UFOs exist? Are aliens real? Are the governments hiding the biggest secret in history? We're UFO seekers, and we're on a hunt for the truth. Subscribe to our YouTube channel and follow along with us as we journey across the United States, visiting UFO hotspots and alien hotspots, trying to document the UFO phenomenon. Catch us on Spaced Out Radio every third Monday of the month as we discuss Area 51, UFOs, and more. And also, don't forget to subscribe to us on YouTube.
Become more intimate and interactive with Spaced Out Radio. Join our Space Travelers Club with your new membership. For $5 a month, we'll provide you with special access to the website, monthly prize draws from books to psychic readings, along with monthly newsletter, private interviews, and more. Sign up today to be part of Spaced Out Radio's experience.
Don't have time to listen to Spaced Out Radio live? Wherever you are, the car, the office, the shower, or even if you're traveling, we're right here for you. Each Spaced Out Radio show can be found on iTunes, TuneIn, and on our YouTube channel, Spaced Out Radio Show. It's the perfect way for you to catch up on our shows. For more information, just head over to our website, spacedoutradio.com, and tune in to us today.
There's a lot of strange going on in this world, and we can help you find out what's going on with you. Paranormal, cryptids, UFOs in the sky, aliens in your bedroom tickling your toes. We have the investigators you need to find out the answers you deserve. All you have to do is head to spacedoutradio.com. Your information is 100% confidential. The SOR Sightlines Report. It's free, and we're here to help.
You hear footsteps in the empty room above you. A rocking chair begins rocking by itself. Don't be afraid of the things that go bump in the night. Reach for Spirit Storybox, the iPhone app the Huffington Post UK called the only ghost hunting app you will ever need. Spirit Storybox. The spirits are telling their stories.
It's Cosmic Sundays with me, Elizabeth Anglin, in Cosmic Passport. Let me take you down a 3-hour spiritual journey where we will get into everything from ET contact to Psychic Sundays. It's a journey of listening and learning together with some of the best professionals in their fields. You can tune in to Cosmic Passport at spacedoutradio.com every Sunday, starting at 9 p.m. Pacific, midnight Eastern.
The views and opinions expressed by tonight's guest and topic of discussion do not necessarily represent the official policy or position of Spaced Out Radio, Spaced Out Weekend, Spaced Out Radio Limited, its hosts, syndicated carriers, or anyone associated with this broadcast. You're listening to Spaced Out Radio with Dave Scott. Follow Dave on Twitter at Spaced Out Radio and hashtag Spaced Out Radio, and on Facebook, Spaced Out Radio Show. Now, back to the program.
A child grew up too fast, went running wild. Now we don't know.
Welcome back to the third and final hour of Spaced Out Radio tonight. I am your host, Dave Scott. Good to have you with us. Tomorrow night on the program, William Van Huss is going to join us. We are going to be talking about the Mad Gasser of Mattoon. Whatever the hell that is. It seems creepy, it seems freaky, so we're going to get into it. People getting gassed a few decades ago by the Mad Gasser. 9 p.m. Pacific, midnight Eastern Time at spacedoutradio.com. We want to say hello to everyone listening in on WQEE 99 Rock the Key down in Noonan, Georgia, home of The Walking Dead. We are live as well on the United Public Radio Network, 107.7 FM in New Orleans, and over 160 countries around the world. We're also live on the Fringe FM, the High Plains Talk Radio Network, and if you're listening in on Revolution Radio, remember the Double R Machine is a donation station financed by you, the valued listener. Head on over to freedomslips.com and donate today. Bill Cardwell has set the password for tonight in the SOR Space Travelers Club. Seagnology. Seagnology is your password. Make sure you use it wisely, Space Travelers, as Bill sets a password each and every night right here on the mighty SOR. Now, I can say this. Nobody in the world really knows what Seagnology means. Bill just makes them up sometimes, I believe, if he's not cheating and letting other people use them. Anyhow, moving on. We're on Twitter at Spaced Out Radio. You could use the hashtag Spaced Out Radio if you want to connect live with me during the show as well. We are live on periscope.tv. So you just type in Spaced Out Radio in the little search bar there. We'll pop on up right there. And, click that heart button a number of times. We like them hearts on there. All right, you can also give our Facebook page a like, Spaced Out Radio Show. On Instagram, follow me at Dave Scott, SOR. Our YouTube channel, youtube.com/Spaced Out Radio. If you want to connect with us there as well. We're on iHeartRadio in the United States, TalkStream Live. Tune us in on TuneIn. Download and subscribe to our shows on iTunes. Our website is spacedoutradio.com, where we have a plethora of features for you. Yes, a plethora of features for you, including joining the SOR Space Travelers Club for $5 a month. Rock out to some Bumblefoot. Shop at the Spaced Out Radio store. Pick yourself up a nice t-shirt. You can also read up on the encounter online or watch great videos from UFO Seekers, Contact TV, and so much more at spacedoutradio.com. Tonight, in hour number 3, we bring in Eric Cooper from Forest Moon Paranormal, who is also pagan, and we're going to learn more about being pagan, what it's like, and if you do have to have a very nice beard in order to be pagan. That I don't know. We're going to figure that out. But before we bring Eric out, I want to just mention a couple of things. We do have our GoFundMe account going on. GoFundMe.com/We Own the Night. We are trying to raise money to build a brand new Spaced Out Radio studio here at headquarters, so that way we can switch over to terrestrial radio, because we do have radio stations lining up. So that's GoFundMe.com/We Own the Night. We would appreciate any help that you could give us. We would thank you for that in advance or currently, depending on what you do. Also, want to say thank you to Mitch Horowitz, who is with us the first 2 hours of the show, breaking down the occult, witchcraft, paganism, Wicca, and so much more. His website, mitchhorowitz.com. And my final announcement for tonight, the most important for tonight, my grandmother turned 90 today. Yes, she was born in 1928. She is the only grandparent I have left. Grandma, I love you. You are the best. I tried calling her today, did not get a hold of her, because I think she was at bingo tonight. I think she went to the bingo tonight. So I'll have to get a hold of her tomorrow again. Eric Cooper, Forest Moon Paranormal, Master Pagan. What's going on?
How you doing tonight, Dave?
I tell you, man, I'm getting my butt kicked. I'm getting my butt kicked right now. You know, everybody on Periscope is like, "What's wrong, Dave?" I am like, you know, very close to a migraine here, and you know, it's my head and my eyeballs feel like they're actually going to shoot out of my head, but that's okay. We got a few minutes left in the show, and, well, more than a few, more like 50, but we're going to make it happen. We're going to get it done, and it's going to be a lot of fun tonight because I always enjoy your time on the air. Now, were you born into a pagan family, Eric, or was this something that you made a lifetime decision on?
No. Actually, I was born and raised Assembly of God. I went to church every Sunday morning and evening, Wednesday evening, went to Christian school my entire life, and went to Jim Sawyer Bible College. But as my mom could tell you, Dad didn't care. But as Mom could tell you, I never fit, and she just hoped and prayed I would fit, but I never fit into that religion. I despise that religion. But, you know, when your parents tell you, get your church clothes on, you're going. You get your church clothes on, you're going. Now, when I got home, and I had no clue as a kid what pagan meant or, you know, what it was, I'd put my play. We had a 40-acre beef farm in the mountains, and I'd put my play clothes on, and I'd be out in the woods. I'd be out with nature. I'd be grounding. I would be playing with the animals. I'd be pagan. I didn't know it. I didn't know it until I was, 1990s when I started doing occult research and had no idea what witchcraft was or anything occult for that matter. So I was picking up books as soon as I joined the Army. And it's funny because, you know, pagan and paranormal, I was studying both at the same time because they work together. But what we see is what normal people see as paranormal to us is normal. Because pagans know spirits, work with spirit, work with fairies, work with, you know, everything that normal people that are not pagan and don't know anything about it is a normal part of life as a pagan. Which is why what we do in, you know, FMP is perfectly natural. So, no, I started my studies in about 1990. About 1995 is when I actually came out. I found some Wiccan books and was very comfortable with Wicca. So I started calling myself Wiccan. Now, I loved your guest tonight. He was very knowledgeable. He knew everything, and that's rare. And don't get me wrong, but a lot of people that say they know about the occult really don't. Now, let me clarify a little bit more about what pagan is. Pagan is an umbrella term, like you said, but Wicca falls under that umbrella. Wicca is pagan. Witches are pagan, but not all witches are Wiccan. Now, Wicca itself, and there's a lot of infighting within the witch community as far as how old Wicca actually is. But Wicca in America, in today's society, actually started in about the 1940s with a man named Joe Gardner. He was in Europe. He was working with the witch cults in Europe and developed Wicca, and it's called Gardnerian Wicca. There's several different, so it's going to sound complicated. It kind of is, but Wicca is also an umbrella for many different varieties of Wiccans. There's fairy Wiccans, there's Alexandrian, there's Gardnerian. Now, Alexandrian and Gardnerian are named after their founders. Then there's Corellian. Corellian is kind of unique, and I actually like Corellian Wiccans because they actually blend Native American with Wicca. So it's real vast. But under the pagan umbrella is Wicca, witches, druids, Asatru, which Asatru is your Odinists. They follow Odin. They're more Norse. The Vikings would fall under Asatru. Then you got shamans, because you have Celtic shamans versus Native American shamans. And then you have Shinto. Shinto, you will never hear anything about. If you ever find a book on Shinto, I wouldn't really pay much attention to it, because Shinto itself is a family tradition. It's an oral tradition. If you follow Shinto, guaranteed you learn from your grandmother or someone in your family. It will never be written in a book. So when I was in the Army, I actually got into the political side of paganism with the military, because we didn't have and I don't think there still is, a Wiccan or a pagan chaplain. So what they did is created what's called, and today it's called a DRGL. They changed the name. It's a Distinguished Religious Group Leader. Now, they kind of fill the role of the chaplain, but they have to be sponsored by the military chaplain. So there was no recognized group, and this was in Germany. So we looked up the regulations. Let me back up. What started that was when I went to a morning formation to a unit I was in, and the first sergeant, who was in charge of the whole company, came out and said, if you are Wiccan or a Satanist, you will not practice in my company area. But if you're a Christian, I'll make sure you get to go to church. And I about fainted, because, as a witch back then, I practiced in my home. I didn't, I kept in the closet, essentially. And as soon as formation broke, I said, nah, this ain't right. This ain't cool. That's blatant discrimination. So I went to the training NCO, the training sergeant, and got the names of every soldier that was listed as pagan, looked up the regulations, got the regulations, figured out what I had to do to be a DFGL at that time. And we actually started a group there. So moving up to Iraq, I already knew what the standards and what the procedures were to do it, so we actually had Desert Moon Grove. And we had about 100 soldiers, airmen, civilian contractors, and we met every night as pagans. There's a lot of discrimination in the Army, or in the military in general. It's gotten a little bit better over the years. I mean, I haven't been in since 2010, but we're talking in the period of 2004 to 2010 when I actually got out. I mean, we had everything from there was a soldier that was dying, and a chaplain went and saw a pagan on his dog tag, stepped over him, and went to the next soldier. When the DRGL asked why he wasn't called to give him his last rites to, be with the soldier, he was told to stay in his lane. So, and that's a drastic case. As far as my group directly, my chaplain, who was with us in the first tour, actually had to threaten my battalion with an EO complaint, an equal opportunity complaint, against the battalion in our name, because I was actually told that we can't meet by my first sergeant, and this is a completely different first sergeant than, the other unit in 2001. But, so it's real bad being pagan in the military, to an extent. Today you won't even find them, because I think they've gone back into being secretive again because of that. And in 2009, you had the Evangelical Association flood the chaplaincy corps with their folks, and their whole mission is to convert soldiers to their belief. So what do you do? And then in 2009, there was a chaplain that actually got the Bible turned into Putang, Pushtan. There we go. The Afghanistani language, so that they could go convert these Afghanistanis to their belief using an infantry unit. That actually hit the news. So that's some of the things you face as a pagan from the military side of it. From the civilian side, Forest Moon Grove is the headquarters of Forest Moon Paranormal. We are a branch off of the headquarters group, and it is a legal pagan church by the state of Washington. So on that side of it, we are here to assist pagans as needed, educate the public. We had a homeless closet at one point in time, helped with social issues and that kind of thing.
When you decided to switch over to paganism, what kind of reaction did you receive from family and friends? Because, I mean, when you do something different, whether it's change your religion or come out as gay or that you've had experiences that are strange and odd, people change their tone towards you. You know?
So that's an interesting story, but yeah. So they know I'm pagan now. They didn't for, let's see, so 1990 to 2005, so 15 years of me being a witch, they had no clue. And, yeah, Joe's cracking me up here in the chat room. But, so, I was in Iraq, and my ex and my stepdaughter were staying at my parents'. And they told my stepdaughter to get ready for church, and she told them no. And you don't tell Grandma and Grandpa no, but they said, well, what do you mean no? And she said, well, my dad is a pagan high priest, and I don't have to go to Sunday school. Well, that's kind of how we found out. And so I got back from Iraq, and we had that discussion, and she just, Mom just kind of, and that's when I found out, honestly, I knew you never fit into Christianity. It just wasn't your calling. So we'll just agree to disagree, and we just won't talk religion. And that's, I didn't tell them basically because I guess I was afraid I would be shunned, or give them a heart attack, or you don't know what to expect. But it went over actually a lot smoother than I expected.
Do you find working with the paranormal as much as you do that being pagan helps get you closer to the spiritual aspect of solving what's going on?
No, hands down. No, that's an easy question. Yeah. Now, with the spirit and the entity side, yes. Aliens have nothing to do with paganism. So the alien side, no, that's just a whole different realm. But yeah, like I said, what we see is normal. And honestly, if you went to a normal paranormal team and told them it was a fairy issue that was going on, a lot of, if they're not used to the fairy realm, used to that side of it, they would probably laugh and go, no, it's not fairies. Fairies don't exist. So as a pagan team, yes, we see, the whole spectrum. And so if it is a fairy issue, we know how to address it, and we know what to look for.
So a lot of people may, Eric, have, a little bit of an understanding of what it is or the rituals are with being pagan. Could you fill us in? Because I think there's a lot of people who, even myself, Coop, who don't understand, and I think I know you pretty well, but I don't understand the religious side of you, from, Sam Hain to the, to whatever it may be, the solstices, it doesn't make sense to me. It doesn't compute because I was never brought up around that. And I'm sure majority of our listeners are the exact same way. So when it comes to rituals around certain events, could you go through maybe the calendar year and what you guys do for each one?
I can, and let me address something so I know what EJ was asking, and EJ was asking, how do we pray? Think of prayer as just words and sending energy out to the universe. It's the same thing with Christians. They send words out to the universe, to their deity, God. So with pagans, prayer, chants, things like that, it's the same thing. It's just words that you send out to the universe. So the Sabbath rituals that we honor, and he was right with Samhain, spelled Samhain, but it's pronounced Samhain. And every pagan tradition is very similar in how they in the Sabbats that they honor, because it's all based on the wheel of the year. There are 8 Sabbats. And they're all based on seasons. They're all based on, every tradition is also going to have special days based on what their tradition is. Druids are going to have, their own days. Wiccans, again, a lot of this is based off Wicca, but I am not Wiccan. So Wiccans are very dogmatic in that everything they do has to be done a certain way. Most of them honor a god and a goddess. They're polytheistic on that matter, with the exception of Dianics. Dianic Wiccans are more the feminist side of things, and they usually only honor a goddess. So my deities personally are Morrigan, who is the Celtic goddess of war, death, and rebirth. As a soldier, she was very fitting. She actually came to me in a meditation, said, "Hi, I'm Morrigan. I'll be with you in Iraq." I have no doubt that she was with me in Somalia and Desert Storm. I have no doubt, because I came so close to death in Somalia. Yeah, I know darn well that there had to have been someone with me. And why did she come to me during Iraq or before Iraq rather than Somalia? Because I think I was meant to be a leader on the pagan side, and she was there for that. And, oh my God, I wish we had more than an hour, because I could go into a whole lot of stories about that. So, before I get into the Wheel of the Year real quick, I'll explain what we did for a protective rite. We actually, myself and 4 other pagans got together to do a protective rite over the convoy before we left Kuwait into Iraq. And basically, they're real simple. Rites are real simple. Spells are real simple. It's all color correspondence based on the energy you're going to use. So with this protective rite, we actually use white and silver candles because they mean purity, and they along with black candles. And we basically said kind of a prayer, but it was essentially to Morrigan saying, "Look, Morrigan, we're about to drive about 300 miles from Kuwait into Balad. We need assistance. Make sure we're safe. And you let the candles blow. You let the candles burn themselves out. You don't ever put them out. You never blow them out, because essentially with blowing them out, you are blowing the energy out, if that makes sense." So we got done with his ritual and went to sleep. I got woken up to my soldiers going, "Sergeant Cooper, you got to see this." I was like, it's weird. I've never seen anything like it. So I got up, I walked outside, and there were like over 1 million dragonflies. And they were all heading towards Iraq. Now, if that ain't a sign, so a skeptic would say, "Oh yeah, it was just migratory time. They were just moving." No, that you can say that, but it's funny that it only happened at that particular time. And we drove, I don't know, 300, 400, 500 vehicles, 300 miles for 3 days from Kuwait into Balad, Iraq. Not a shot was fired. No one got attacked. No one died. Nothing blew up. Nothing. And at night we'd stop. We'd sleep on top of our vehicles on the hoods. And I remember the first night, and this is my 3rd combat tour, so I've got, privates that have never been to combat before. They're going, "Sergeant Cooper, were those explosions?" I'm like, "Yeah, that was way out in the distance. Don't worry about it." Wait, was that gunfire? Like, "Yeah, go to sleep. It was out in the distance. Don't worry about it." And, we heard explosions. We heard firefights off in the distance. So, we drove 3 days, not a shot fired, nothing happened. So that's a basic protective rite. It really depends on which deity you follow. Or some pagans don't even follow a deity. They work with energy. They work with the earth. Some work with fairies. But, okay, so Samhain is October 31st every year. It's called Halloween. And like Craig said, it's an ancestral holiday. You honor the dead, your deceased relatives that passed on. If you have an altar, you would put pictures of your loved ones on the altar. You would put pumpkins. You would put, apples. You would put some of the fall symbols on the altar. And it's all based on really who your deities are. Every deity's got their own symbols. So like Morrigan, I use the stone bloodstone. Let's see, she is symbolized by the red cow, the black dog, the crow. So ravens are very close to me. Yeah. Oh, let me answer a question real quick, because Markham. Yeah, not all pagans are polytheistic. Some of them, like I just said, don't even honor deities. They work with energy or fairies or the earth, and some of them are actually monotheistic, like I said, with Dianic Wiccans. So you got Samhain, and going by Wiccan tradition again, Samhain is when the god dies. So your god dies in Samhain. It's going into winter. Going into winter. It's the end of fall. Your next Sabbath is Yule. Now, Yule or the summer solstice is December 21st. Sometimes it's the 22nd. And that's you got the fight between the Holly King and the Ivy King. That's also when the god is reborn. So the fight between the Holly King and the Ivy King is basically the fight of the seasons, symbolically, between when the dark of the night. And I'm trying to think how to explain this simply. But basically, it's the fight over, the longest night of the year versus when the light starts coming back. Also, as we have the Yule log, and they're all symbolic for the people that have heard about Yule logs before. And I'm slowly trying to watch you chat room as we go. So Imbolc. Imbolc is February 2nd. That's actually the next Sabbath coming up. It's kind of a candle. There's a lot of candles involved with that Sabbath, because think of the Celtic days. The Celtic days, it's a lot of the Sabbaths are based around harvests. So we've got Lughnasadh or Lammas, which is August 1st. That is the first of the harvest Sabbaths. And if you look at Celtic tradition, if their harvest failed, they were going to die in the winter, because if they didn't have enough food to survive, so a lot of it was honoring the harvest deities. That's where the term Lammas bread comes from, if you've ever heard of that one. So in Iraq, we actually had a Lammas festival, and that's actually where I got the pictures of the elementals leaving, for those that have seen that picture. So that's your bread and your wheat Sabbath. Then you got Mabon, which is September 21st, sometimes the 22nd. And that is your fruits and vegetables, the second of the harvest festivals. And that would be when you're honoring basically the garden. Again, I'm losing train of thought here. We're getting heady. But you're honoring, again, the deities that bring about the harvest. And that's focused on the garden, because that's about the time that you're getting all the vegetables out of the garden and whatnot. And then you're canning and getting them ready, again, based on the Celts. So then getting back to Samhain, because with Samhain, that's also known as the meat Sabbath. The god dies. It's just before winter. That's when you do the sacrificing or the butchering of livestock and things like that to put meat in the freezer. So it comes back to Imbolc, which some call a Candlemas, or I'm trying to think how that gets explained. So some of it goes back to Catholic saints as well. But basically, there's a lot of candle lighting to encourage the sun to come back. And in February is when you're actually starting to see the sun is starting to come out a little bit longer. So in the Celtic days, they were encouraging the sun to come back because they wanted, they're running out of staples. They're running out of their necessities, and they want the sun to come back so they can start gardening and whatnot again. That brings us to Beltane. Now, for any listeners that have heard of the maypole, that's where that comes from. That is May 1st. It's a fertility a ritual. So with the maypole, they did what was called the May dance, and it's a long pole, symbolic of the phallus, actually, of the earth. And there'll be red and white ribbons that come down, interchanged. And I'm trying to think of how the tradition goes, because I know they're supposed to have, I believe, one more female than male, and they dance kind of like a DNA strand, but they actually dance and intertwine around this maypole. And so the ribbons are actually, and if you actually go in Forest Moon Grove, you'll actually see pictures of all of our Sabbaths that we did in Iraq. But they dance until the ribbons run out, and the last person that's holding the ribbon, the shortest, they tie to the pole. And they're essentially labeled the Beltane, King, Queen. Trying to think here. So that's Beltane. Then you got Letha. Letha is June 21st. That is also known as Midsummer. It is also known as a fairy Sabbath. So a lot of fairy magic goes into play, because it's one of the. So you talk about Sabbats that are the thinnest, where the veil is the thinnest. It would be Samhain, October 31st, and the veil is thin as well at Letha, or June 21st. And that's when you do a lot of fairy magic. You set up your fairy altar. You give offerings to the fairies, things of that nature. And then we get back to Lugnasad, which is, or Lammas, which is August 1st. Mabon already went over September 21st, and then Samhain. That's the wheel of the year. I know I went over it quick. Hopefully, if you have any questions, let me know. Along with those Sabbats, they also they honor, or they do rituals for the full moon and the new moon. And this is where a lot of misconception comes in with, witches dancing naked or sky-clad under the full moon, because they're actually back in the beginning, they were actually honoring the full moon. So any questions, Dave? And did you grasp it all?
I'm just trying to take it all in, my friend. I'm really trying to take it all in, because, this is, honestly, I'm not trying to be rude here. It is strange to me, because it's something that I've never really studied and was not really brought up with, so,
right.
But it's not out of a lack of respect or anything along those lines. I want to get to a question from Andrew here on Twitter. Excuse me. And he says, I had an experience once years ago when I woke up to the strangest and most exquisite music playing somewhere in the distance and yet very close. Sounded like tiny instruments, and the melody was short and it repeated over and over. Later on, I met a Philippine shaman who told me it was the duende, or fairy music. She told me that if they like you, they will let you hear their music. Is this something that happens in paganism, hearing nature spirits or fairies who actually play music?
Oh, most definitely. Yeah, it does happen. And that's also, again, that's very common in Ireland, in the Celtic lands, countries. And, getting back to nature, you also have dryads, which are the fairies, or the spirits of the trees, essentially. And so, yeah, and, if you tune yourself, you can hear the wind. The wind will talk to you. Meditation is a big part of being pagan. And astral travel, believe it or not, is common with a lot of pagans, which is why it's very fitting with our team. So if you meditate, you'll hear fairies. And that's a lot of times how you connect with the fairy, is through meditation. That's how you meet your deity, is through meditation. So yeah, it is common. And with some pagans, that's all they practice is with fairies, fairy magic. That's all they work with is fairies in place of deity.
Now, a lot of people will say, Coop, that if you're not praying to God or the God, then you're praying to a false god. Yet there's a lot of people, such as yourself, who believe that Mother Nature is her own spirit. How do you defend that to somebody who is, say, of another religious belief?
To be honest with you, you can't you can't fight that, because the kind of people that say that are the kind of people that are closed-minded enough not to believe you anyway. And those are the ones you ignore. Just to be blunt. Because they're not going to change their mind. It's not my job to change their mind. I can explain that, nature and multiple deities are all the same energy as their own deity. Almost all religions essentially lead to the same end. Now, you tell them it leads to reincarnation, they're gonna run a pointy stick through your heart, potentially. And you still do have you have radicals in every belief, paganism included, who would go to those means, which is, in some aspects, you do have to be careful.
When it comes to celebrating nature and the positivity of Mother Earth, like you just went through the list there, are there any rituals that are more special than others, that mean more, or take more of a nature role where you're outside and maybe worshiping the ground you're on?
Okay, well, planting the garden is essentially a ritual because you're connecting with Earth. And just taking walks, I go on the mountain, and that's connecting with Earth. The eclipses, those are another powerful time for us, because you've got the sun and the moon combined, so you got solar energy combined with lunar energy. That's the ultimate of energy right there. So when you have eclipses, for sure. And
one sec there. Take me through what you do during an during an eclipse. What do you do?
Meditate and pull the energy in. Bring the energy into you, into yourself. And whatever you want to accomplish, you push that energy out to accomplish it. Let me run you through a basic prosperity spell, because those are the easiest to explain. So if you want a bill paid, now energy is not going to give you millions. It's not going to accommodate greed. But if you're really struggling, and I've proven this before, if you're really struggling and need a bill paid, take that bill. Put a green candle over it. Green is the color of money in this case. So a lot of it has to do with correspondences, herbs, stones, colors, things of that nature. So with a basic prosperity spell, you're going to take a green spell candle. You're going to find a symbol of money, whether it's a dollar sign, whatnot, and then do what's called dressing. That's where you take some mint oil and you basically anoint that oil with mint oil, and then put the candle on top of the bill. Light the candle, and you're going to sit there and you're just going to focus on that candle and envision your bills being paid, or that particular bill being paid, until that candle goes out. That's a basic spell, and it is only good as much energy as you put into it. So go get your green candle, Dave.
Yes. Well, that green candle is going to be about that thick talking about that long, man. Honestly. What about... before I get to my question, I'm going to get to Eric with a K's question. He's saying, why do we need to do rituals or spells?
Well, you don't. It's a matter of how much practice you want, or how much you want to practice in your belief. You don't have to do spells or rituals. It's all about energy, though. If you don't use energy, you lose it, essentially. But think of the old times. Today you don't have to do rituals so much. That's fine. But back then they believed they had to do rituals to bring the harvest in. So we're looking at the old times versus the new. So the new times, yeah, okay, you don't have to. But if you have a deity, for example, I would encourage you to. Now, what do I do with Morgan? Well, I'm still a warrior as far as the political side goes, as far as the paranormal side goes. So she's still fitting, and she'll never leave me anyway. But again, with a Morgan altar, her colors are red and black. So I'll have red and black candles set up. Bloodstone, maybe a symbol of a raven. Things of that nature. And I'll encourage her to help our troops. That would be one measure. And maybe say a prayer or a chant. Because again, it's all energy. Does that help answer?
It does help answer, and I say thank you for that. You want to hang out for Thought of the Dave?
Sure.
Wonderful. Because we had one hell of a debate on Davy's Facebook today. That's for sure. It was one hell of a debate on Davy's Facebook. So let's get into it, shall we?
Sure.
It's got my music playing.
Okay.
Little cuter by Mr. Ron Bumblefoot.
So what was the debate about?
Well, we're going to read it off here. That's what we do on the Thought of the Dave. The Thought of the Dave is a question I put on my Facebook every single day to see what your reaction is, to see what you are talking about in regards to the topic of discussion that night on the show. So today, we had the busiest one yet. Nice simple question. Do you think the occult and witches are misrepresented by history and people not fully understanding the practice? What do you think, Cooper?
Oh, hands down. I see it every day. I see it every day on Facebook. I mean, our own. I'm not going to break this political, but our own government.
True that. We
so,
see it all
hands down. And well, you know what's funny is, so I'm going through American Lit class right now, and I have to read the old 1800s writings. And, you know, the Puritans were I'm thinking the Puritans were probably the old-style version of today's fundamentalists. I think that's where the fundamentalists started, because they were all about pushing their belief on everybody. And then a Native American named Redcoat came out and made a speech and said, you know what, Native Americans have our own belief. We're very happy with our belief. I'm glad the white man has their belief, but you can keep your belief because we're happy with ours. And you see that today with the misrepresentation of the occult and paganism, in that they want to convert everybody. And we don't want it. We just want to practice our belief unscathed. That's it.
Mm-hmm. All right. Let's get to some comments on the Thought of the Dave today. We're going to start off with David Chase, who reads, the practice varies from one individual to another, and yes, many people have had a serious prejudice against the occult and witches. Do you still feel that prejudice is heavily out there for you, Eric?
In the military, I did. Today in civilian society, not so much.
Okay.
I mean, Izzy and I we don't hide the fact that we're witches. That's not a big deal. So, do we get attacked? No, we don't. Do we get slandered? No, we don't.
How many horsepower is your
I'd say
broom? That's what I want to know. How many horsepower is your broom, witch?
150 ravens.
Oh, very nice. Very nice. Very nice.
And a beer tub.
Now, does that come with satellite radio?
It does. It does, because they're actually, we've converted over to vacuums now.
Oh, okay. Oh, vacuums. Oh, my goodness. It's one hell of a plug-in cord. All right. Brandy says, history does represent the fear from lack of knowledge. So is witchcraft misrepresented? Yes. But is the history of the practice itself misrepresented? No. It's a form of media sensationalism in the 1600s. Your thoughts, Coop?
Well, what media sensationalism? In the 1600s, other than press, they didn't have so much media.
No, but they were going around door to door and in the newspapers, which was the way things got around and news got around. They were telling people that we were going to have a hanging today of some witches.
That's true. But you know what? It all had to do with money, in my opinion. Because the church, if they lost the congregation, they lost the money. So we've got to make people look bad, because half the witches that they burnt or half the witches that were hanged weren't even witches. Back then it was they were herbalists. So it was really all about money. And so-and-so will go a snitch to the church. They think their neighbor is a witch because, well, they didn't like her and they wanted her husband, or they wanted the house, or whatever. And that's what it boiled down to. Most of the people that got lynched were not witches.
Let's not forget, it was also a good way to get rid of a wife you didn't like back then.
Exactly.
No, it's true. I'm not even being sarcastic with that. All right, let's move on here to our next person. Dennis says, yes, and exact. What people do not understand, they fear, doubt, persecute, divide. It's all ego. Humans, for the most part, are comfortable in their bubble. They don't want to know what's outside it, because they be comfy sheep lemmings, or be afraid, be very afraid monger for the ones that they themselves fear the unseen. To each their own. All right. So I'm going to continue moving on here, because we got 40 comments and I'll never get done. All right. Keith Bradley, he goes, there is not a simple answer. The question must be better defined. Which occult practices? What witches? We would have to take periods of time and cultures into our discussions. From one time to another, all groups have been misrepresented by historians. The study of history is one of constantly correcting and refining the pieces that make up the mosaic of the historical picture. And I agree with this one. Now, I believe Keith is a pastor. So I do believe that, he's for a gentleman who's a pastor, he looks at things with a very, very open mind, which in my opinion is extremely rare in any field of religion, especially when you're the one who people are congregating to see and hear speak. So Kevin comes out and says, don't know if he was in the bathroom or not when that happened, but and you never know if it's actually Kevin or Kevin's beard who is making the comment. He's never specific about it. It's a guessing game. Like with you, I ask, but he says, one of my favorite topics. Exactly. Was it? You can tell the difference? Okay. He goes, what the church doesn't want us to know, what humanity is really capable of. The intentional misrepresentation of a knowledge so incredible, the people of power suppress it for the fear of losing control. Glad I'll be able to listen tonight. Well, yes, thank you, buddy. Gail says, because it's good to have different perspectives. Here is something to consider. Deuteronomy 18:10-14. 10 to 14, there shall not be found among you anyone who makes his son or daughter pass through the fire, or one who practices witchcraft, or a soothsayer, or one who interprets omens, or a sorcerer, or who conjures up spells, or a medium, or a spiritist, or one who calls up the dead. For those who do these things, they are an abomination to the Lord. And because of the abominations, the Lord your God drives them out before you. You shall be blameless before the Lord your God, for these nations will dispossess, listen to soothsayers and diviners, but as for you, the Lord has not got appointed such for you. Apparently I'm going to hell. Apparently.
But what they got to remember is the Old Testament was supposed to be for, I'm trying to remember, but the Old Testament was supposed to be null and void. They're supposed to follow the New Testament now.
Mm-hmm.
So those laws are not supposed to apply to you today.
Mm-hmm. All right. Bonnie says, yes, in general I do. It's like anything else. Good and bad reside in everything. Most witches are not out to hurt anyone, only help them. Down in Cedro Woolley, Washington State, Chris Dodge, who we like to call Hemi around these parts, she says, look at traditions. Halloween represents witches as bad, scary. They eat children. The only good witch is the witch in The Wizard of Oz. There are good witches out there now, but cannot compete with the reputation already made. People are afraid, especially of things they don't know about. It's called fear of the unknown. I agree with that one. Tessa follows up. You know Tessa very well. She goes, the ignorant always misrepresent what they are afraid of. They fail to take the time to learn and understand that which is unknown to take them. Instead, they make assumptions and misrepresent these things. All right, moving on. And I know this, a lot of people spoke out against Christianity, and I kind of had to, reel in the reins about this. Old Davey jumped in here. Oh, whoa, peeps. No hate speech. We have Christians, Wiccan, Catholics, everyone here. What is not tolerated on my page is ignorance, especially on the thought of the Dave. Shame that I have to erase some of the comments on here. So I give myself a clap, for having to play police officer with a headache. So that's for me. Alexandra from Pacific North Weird weighed in. I think as much damage has been done by Christians as has been done by neo-pagans and New Age practices to obscure actual occult beliefs. Why do we always got to get back to the damage? Why can't we just look forward and come together? That is my question. That's what I want to know. Am I wrong?
Exactly.
Am I wrong for that?
No.
Eric, you're pagan, okay? I grew up in a Christian family. I know you did too, but you being pagan, okay? Are you worried? Are you trying to bring back the witches that were burned at the stake, 250 years ago because people were more ignorant then? Or have you let that one go and say, let's move on and let's all make this planet a beautiful place, man?
We've moved on. And we get this rap of conjuring demons. We don't conjure demons. We remove them. We're helping people, and most witches are. But there are witches out there and other pagan beliefs that do give the pagan belief a bad name. I'll agree with that. And as far as the old pagans, most of the knowledge was burnt in the Alexandrian library and other libraries that got burnt down through wars. And so most of the old knowledge is gone. So you have nothing but the neo-pagans to bring back what they've learned through what they have been able to research to try to rekindle, and move on in a positive note.
Excellent. I'm going to read one more comment here before we start to pack things up. Joe Monk, what a bunch of bigoted crybabies. Bashing Christians may go over well while you are rubbing your crystals in a huge... Well, that's about as far as I'm getting there. Joe's mane was fired up. Fired up! Fired up! Joe Roop gets the last comment. We'll go to a different Joe, much calmer. He's from Arkansas. says, absolutely, but just the opposite. There are many claiming to be occultists who are the reason it's getting dragged through the mud as well. And on that note, Mr. Cooper, thank you so much for hopping in here in hour number 3 to tell us what it's like being pagan and, really opening our eyes. I appreciate that, buddy.
Oh, always a pleasure. Always a pleasure.
Oh, we love having you on. You hold on, my friend, as we wrap this thing up. We got Mr. Ron Bumblefoot THAL rocking in the background with Little Brother is Watching. Bumblefoot is the official music of Spaced Out Radio, rocking us in and out of every single show. Make sure you check him out live as well. It's very, very cool. Dennis, it's Arkansas. Arkansas, not Arkansas. Pronounce that S. We're not in Quebec, man. Not in Quebec. Anyhow, tomorrow night on the program, William Van Hess is going to join us. We're talking about the Mad Gasser of Mattoon. Mad Gasser of Mattoon. Arkansas. Arkansas. We get going at 9 p.m. Pacific, midnight Eastern Time at spacedoutradio.com. We also want to say thank you to Mitch Horowitz for coming on for hours 1 and 2 to talk about the occult, to talk about Ouija boards, and so much more. What a great guest. We're going to try and get him back on as well. Really had a lot of fun with him. Want to also give a shout out to our GoFundMe account, GoFundMe.com/We Own the Night. That's where you can go, donate, help us build a studio. If you don't have the means to donate, share the post. It means just as much to me. Big thank you to everybody listening in at home, in their cars, at work. Everybody on Periscope.tv. You know who you are. I'm looking at you right now, especially you, Gail, as well as everybody on Twitter at hashtag Spaced Out Radio, the veterans in the SOR Space Travelers Club on Facebook, and everybody on Spreaker. Thank you so much, my friends. I'll hopefully feel better tomorrow because together we own the night. See you tomorrow. Good night.